Hello everyone. Tonight we embark on a chilling journey so cold it could shatter your soul, where every breath might be your last. This isn't war, it's a collective ordeal in the frost, where hunger, cold, and betrayal kill faster than bullets. Forget glorious victories and marching bands. The truth is, if you were a soldier in Napoleon's Russian campaign, simply surviving was sheer madness. Before you lean back comfortably, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy the content I share, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see viewers from all over the world. Now, turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for some background noise, and let's step into tonight's journey together. Tonight we begin with something colder than a frozen blade, the survival struggle in Napoleon's invasion of Russia. Forget heroic films with thundering drums, galloping horses in white snow, and the determined gazes of French soldiers. The reality is, you're cold, hungry, reeking like a discarded torn boot in a corpse cellar, and every passing night is a gamble between life and death, with the prize being another day of suffering. You're not a glorious general or a national hero. You're an anonymous soldier, feet swollen, coat smeared with horse dung, trudging through a white nightmare called Russia in the winter of 1812. Ahead of you is snow, behind you the bodies of friends, and under your feet are boots so worn, you've stuffed them with newspaper. Printed 6 months ago, news that saves no one but at least keeps a few toes from falling off. You thought training was tough? Try sleeping in -30-degree winds, in an empty field, while your stomach claws at itself from eating 2 crumbs of dry bread, a half-cooked rat, and the last scraps of hope for survival. You thought war was gunfire. Here the howling wind and your chattering teeth are louder than cannons. You don't die from bullets, you die from losing toes, losing strength, losing sanity. And if the cold doesn't kill you, your tent mate might, accidentally stealing the only blanket. This isn't a campaign, it's a weeks-long punishment, where only the reckless, shameless, and desperate enough can call themselves survivors. So, put on an extra layer, turn off the lights, light a fire in your heart, because there's no wood out there, and get ready. You're about to become one of the unluckiest soldiers in European history, and you'll have to fight, not the enemy, but every miserable second of your own existence. But don't think it all started with flesh-cutting cold. No, at the beginning, things looked pleasant. Sunny skies, cool breezes, endless Polish fields, under galloping hooves, military bands blaring, tens of thousands of boots, marching like a colossal victory machine. You looked around, saw comrades joking, whistling, and no one suspected that, in a few months, half of them would die silently, blood frozen in their hearts, hands half gnawed. Back then, you still wore clean clothes, a round hat, boots, still a matching pair. Superiors declared this the greatest campaign Europe has ever seen, that Napoleon was an invincible military genius, that Russia would kneel in weeks, and you believed it. If you didn't, no one asked. They handed you a sack of hardtack, 2 bags of hope, and a smudged propaganda sheet, claiming Russians would greet you with bread. The first few weeks felt like a picnic. You bathed in rivers, washed socks, laughed when a soldier fell into mud, and got chased by a wild boar for stepping on its den. Blue skies, air scented with wild grass. At sunset, campfires lit up like rest stops for future victors. One night, you even heard an accordion from a group of Italian soldiers, drinking wine, singing about love and girls back home. You laughed, raised a cup, and thought, if every war is like this, it's fine. But then the 12th night passed. You woke up with an itch on your neck, then another, and another on your back. That was your first encounter with Eastern European fleas, tiny, ambitious creatures, treating every thread of fabric as territory to conquer. Within a week, the whole platoon was scratching until they bled, some driven mad, running naked through camp screaming, "They're eating me," and that was just the start of the inconvenience. After fleas came rain, after rain, mud after mud, soaked hardtack. One day, you opened your rations and found the salted meat green with mold. The cook was drunk, the captain busy writing a diary titled, "I am Hannibal Reborn." No one cared what you ate. No one noticed you hadn't defecated in 3 days because your body was clenched from the cold. But what really unsettled you was why, in summer were nights already so cold that your urine steamed like gunpowder smoke. A Polish soldier whispered, "You haven't seen Russia yet. Winter here is like even God gave up." But you laughed. Everyone laughed. Who dies of cold in September? October, maybe. Then the first wave of coughing hit. You saw your best friend spit blood, thought it was a mild cold. 3 days later, he was curled up like a wet dog, eyes rolled back, lips cracked, unburied, because the ground was too hard and wood was saved for porridge. You started to understand this wasn't a journey, this was a one-way trip to a land with no return, and you were in the middle of it. There were still a few nights before the cold became deadly, just enough to keep you awake. The wind cut through your skin like a blade of stone and dead men's breath, so your boots started tearing. One sole flapped open. You fixed it with rope. The rope snapped. You tied it with your trouser drawstring. Then your pants fell. You no longer felt shame. Dignity left your body. The day you ate bread dropped under a horse's hoof, and through all the misery, you still heard the drums, the marching beat sounding every morning. They made you keep going, through ravaged villages, through empty fields, no people, no food, only carrion birds circling like white ghosts. Someone asked, "Where are we going?" The answer, to Moscow. But who cared about Moscow when your guts roared like a trapped beast? One day, you saw a house with smoke rising. Hope sparked in your heart. The whole platoon rushed in. It was a burning cowshed. In 3 minutes, the group surrounded the ashes, scraping for unburnt wood to save for the night. One man stuffed some in his coat. Another licked charcoal, thinking it was burnt bread. And you realized this was the point of no return. You were no longer a soldier. You were software running on ashes, empty guts, and survival instinct. And the scariest part, Moscow was still 700 kilometers away. But you kept walking, because as long as you could walk, you were alive. If you stopped, even for one night, the snow would blanket you forever, a pristine white shroud. And that meant you couldn't afford to be hungry. You couldn't afford to be tired. You couldn't afford to sit for more than 3 minutes, unless you wanted to turn to stone forever. But hunger was the first thing Napoleon didn't account for. Not because he didn't know, but because he believed his army would move fast, fight fast, and win fast. The one thing he forgot, Russia wasn't a chessboard, and his soldiers couldn't eat strategy. So, day by day, your stomach shrank like an empty leather sack. At first, there was hard bread, then moldy bread, then something unidentifiable, a brown lump someone called smoked meat porridge, but inside was half a rat and a human tooth. No joke, an Italian soldier, nearly choked to death, biting into a bone carved with memento mori. You started to understand that rations had vanished from the dictionary. So what did you eat? First, horses. At first, horses dead from cold, then shot horses, then horses, not quite dead, but moving too slowly. And once a horse went down, you'd see a scene even Dante wouldn't dare write into Inferno. Groups of soldiers crowding around, skinning, carving fat, cutting livers, dividing muscle strips. Some ate raw, some roasted over fires made from helmets. Some fainted from the smell of burning meat alone. You had no salt, no pepper, just a rusty knife and a hunger screaming in your guts. One night, you found half a rotten potato under a frozen horse carcass. You broke it in two, gave half to a comrade. He looked at you like a saint, then took a bite and wept, because it still had flavor. A hint of home, though. Home was 2,000 kilometers away, and your mother probably thought you were dead. But that was a good day. Worst days were when you ate boot soles. Yes, soaked in urine for 3 hours, scraped clean, then roasted. The stench of burnt rubber, mixed with urine and gunpowder smoke, became a scent that never left your nose. And if you asked why not hunt, the answer, there was nothing to hunt. Birds were gone, rabbits hid well. Eider and elk had been eaten by the front lines last month. Some even shot at distant figures, hoping it was a villager with turnips. It wasn't. It was another Frenchman, just as hungry, who thought you were walking soup. One noon, you wandered into an abandoned village. Doors collapsed, hearths cold, but in a wall nook, you found a jar. Your mates gathered, holding their breath. You opened it and found pig fat, not the good kind, black as dirt, white with mold, smelling like a fried corpse, but you swallowed it, spoonful by spoonful, each spoonful a tear, each tear a year of life traded away. Another soldier cut violin strings, boiled them into soup, not tasty, but warm enough. Then the worst happened. Someone died from eating strange mushrooms. Not poisoned, just so hungry they ate what even forest animals avoided. Soldiers started marking trees. X for deadly mushrooms, O for survivable ones. Triangle for might make you hallucinate, but helps forget hunger. You tried it once, and nearly jumped into an icy lake, thinking you were a whale, and when hunger peaked, you looked at your comrades differently, not out of hate, but because, meat, his arm was round, his shoulder firm, his neck pale. You shook your head, told yourself, you weren't a monster. But that night, someone from the squad vanished. The next morning, the fire smoldered, a thigh bone was tossed behind a bush. No one asked, no one spoke, just the wind blowing, and someone tapping a pot with an aluminum spoon. And you were still alive, because you ate something, or someone. It didn't matter anymore. You learned that in Napoleon's campaign, orders could be wrong, plans could fail, maps could lie, but hunger was always right. And you also learned, when the commander didn't supply grain, you turned everything around you into a meal. No matter the cost, no matter the morals, no matter if you were still human. Because in Russia's winter of 1812, life wasn't in the heart, it was in the stomach. And when the stomach was empty, nothing else mattered. But that still wasn't enough to kill you. Not yet. To truly send you out of this world in the slowest, most humiliating way, Russia added one final ingredient to the deadly stew: diarrhea. Yes, not cannon fire, not Cossacks, but the thing you laughed at as a kid. Now it was sending your entire squad to the grave. First was the soldier at the front of the line, Paul. One morning, he bolted up in the snow, face pale, stammering, "I need to go now." No one asked where. We just saw him run into the woods like a dog chased by a demon. 3 hours later, Paul returned. No hat, no belt, eyes empty, like he'd seen Napoleon's ghost dancing in the snow. He said nothing, just lay down, wrapped in his coat, and went silent. The next morning, his body was frozen stiff, face still etched with horror, cause of death. Dehydration from acute diarrhea, compounded by gut-wrenching cold, combined with profound despair. And so it began. The second, the third. The whole unit became a mournful choir of rebellious stomachs. Diarrhea in sub-zero temperatures wasn't like at home, where you could run to the toilet and groan. Here, to relieve yourself, you had to drag yourself out into wind that could burst blood vessels in your nose, pull down your pants with trembling hands, squat on ice, and hope you didn't die in the most humiliating position in human history. Some didn't make it in time. Some tried to hold it. Some gave up, and the cold froze the waste inside them. A German soldier said the cold creeps up from below, through your guts, and freezes even your childhood memories. It wasn't a metaphor. Another soldier, Mikhail, lost his mind after 3 nights of non-stop diarrhea. He started speaking Russian, then singing lullabies to bears. When we found him, he was hugging a boot, calling it mother. Then it was your turn. The first stomach cramp hit in the middle of the night, just as you'd curled up in a corner with your only pair of dry socks. The pain twisted, like someone wringing your guts with bare hands. You sweated, not from heat, but because you knew you'd have to go outside. Your boots were off. Your pants were tied with tent cord because the buttons broke, and the latrine was now a frozen battlefield, speckled like an alien planet. You tried to stand. Each step was a small explosion in your gut. Your hands shook, teeth clattered, and then you didn't make it. You knelt in the snow, gasping, and abandoned the concept of dignity. No one looked at you. They'd been there. They understood, or they were too tired to care. The cold didn't kill quickly. It was patient. It seeped into every muscle, every joint, every drop of sweat, and waited for your body to surrender. Diarrhea sped that process up threefold. You lost water. Your eyes blurred. Your skin burned. Your spirit shrank like a thin rag. You stopped thinking. You just shivered and shivered and shivered. A soldier who'd studied medicine said, "We're no longer men, we're sacks of surviving guts." He said it, then died 2 hours later, too weak to bend over and wash his hands. And the irony, no medicine, no ginger tea, no warm blankets. All you had was an empty sack and a rag for wiping, reused countless times, shared among 7 men, and then you had to march, in that condition. Each step, a test of body and pride. Some couldn't take it, sat in the snow, declared, "Where I go, my corpse goes too." The next morning, there it was. But no one remembered his name. They just recalled him as the guy with the stinking pants. Hunger weakened you. Cold made you shiver. But diarrhea was the final stab. It took your water, strength, pride, and will. And once your will was gone, the rest collapsed, one by one. In snow deeper than a man, you realized death here had no specific form. It didn't carry a scythe. It didn't shout your name. It was just a feeling, "I'm too tired to stand." And then you lay down, just for a moment, just to rest, and never got up again. And so, Europe's grandest army, the one that conquered a continent, dissolved man by man, not from gunfire, but from weak stomachs, torn boots, and inescapable snow. And you were still alive, but you started to understand. Death didn't come with a bang. It came with the low growl of a stomach, the whistle of wind through torn pants, and the heavy steps of those unsure if tomorrow would come. And sometimes, the only thing keeping you from that icy death was a pair of boots. Not new boots, not fancy boots, just boots with soles, boots that held warmth, boots without holes big enough for the wind to slip through and turn your toes to stone. The problem was, such boots were scarce, almost non-existent. In a squad of 10, 4 had boots patched with cardboard, 2 wrapped their feet in cloth sacks, 1 went barefoot, and the other 3 were waiting to see who'd be the next to, unfortunately, perish in harsh conditions. Subby? Because when someone died, the first thing taken wasn't their weapon, wasn't their hardtack, but their boots. And when you saw a body curled up in the snow, your first thought wasn't "who was he?" but "what's his shoe size?" It wasn't cruelty, it was survival. One night, you woke up and found your left pinky toe numb. You touched it, hard. You tapped it. It sounded like stone, and you knew if you did nothing, by morning it'd be black and start falling off. You looked at the comrade beside you, Shaq, a messenger, feverish for 3 days, unable to stand, mumbling nonsense about Paris and the cheese tarts his mother used to make. Shaq's boots, intact, leather worn but soles solid, and you stared at those boots like a beast eyeing the last piece of meat in a frozen forest. At first you told yourself, "No, I can't." But then a gust screamed through the tense gaps, whispering death into your souls, and you reached out, slowly, gently. Shaq was still breathing, eyes closed. You untied the laces, pulled off the boots. His feet were so thin, like sticks wrapped in cloth. You slipped your feet in, a perfect fit, not comfortable, but warm. Then you placed your old boots beside him, like a trade in this world's way, and you whispered, "Just borrowing." The next morning, Shaq didn't wake. His face turned toward the dim, foggy sun, and no one asked why his feet were bare. Maybe he died of fever, maybe of cold, maybe because he lost the last boots he had. But you were still alive, walking in those boots. At first you felt guilt, then gratitude, then nothing at all. Because the price of survival wasn't morality, it was the warmth of your souls, and you weren't alone. Another soldier, Lucien, fought a squad mate over a single sock. They wrestled in the snow, rolled through ashes, bashed heads against tent poles. In the end, both lay still, and when one woke, no one remembered who won, only that his feet had 2 socks, and his eyes were empty, like he'd crawled back from hell. Some invented the boot trade: stay by a dying man, care for him, keep him warm, comfort him, to ensure you're the first to take his boots when he breathes his last. It became a job, waiting for death. Take Andrzej, a Polish soldier, once a monk. Now his job was to watch, pick targets, and wait. He didn't kill anyone. He was just quick, very quick. The moment a final breath hissed out, he was at the bedside, untying laces, like unwrapping a Christmas gift, and no one dared stop him, because everyone knew one day he'd be waiting for them. You started to realize boots weren't just foot protection, they were a ticket to keep going. Those with boots walked, those without sat, and became ice statues labeled Unknown Soldier. And sometimes, for a pair of boots, one survived, another died, not from a stab, but from hope stripped from their feet. At night, you dreamed of flying, not for freedom, but because your feet no longer hurt. Then you woke, still curled up in the wind, feet cracked, the bootlaces tying you to this world of ice, blood, and faceless shadows. And you understood, if tomorrow you had to borrow someone's boots again, you'd do it. No hesitation, no shame, no apologies, because survival had no room for the barefoot, and Jacques' boots were now yours, forever. But not everything stayed. Some things, even if you kept your boots, kept your life, slipped away bit by bit. The first was your toes. Toes didn't warn you when they left. They didn't write farewell letters. They didn't scream or ache. They just lost feeling. Then turned pale. Then purple. Then hard as wood. And one morning, you woke, took off your boots, and found one toe had left your body, silently, like a weary lover slipping out of bed at night, without shutting the door. You picked it up, a cold, dry piece of flesh, no longer bleeding. You looked, didn't cry. You just tucked it into your coat pocket. Because, where else could it go? No one taught you how to handle body parts, falling off, piece by piece. Another soldier, René, lost 3 toes in a week. He joked it was the body's tax to stay alive. Then René laughed. But when he lost his big toe, the laughter stopped. Because the big toe was the center of balance. Without it, you walked like your spirit was broken. Each step became a wobbly journey. You slipped, you stumbled, you fell. And once you fell in deep snow, getting up was another matter. René didn't get up again. He was found face up, eyes open, hands clutching an empty boot. And strangely, all his toes had been neatly cut off. Someone, maybe him, decided to cut them before they fell, as a last act of dignity. And then, the trend spread. Cut toes to live. A soldier who'd studied medicine in Lyon set up a field operating room in an old kitchen tent. Tools, a dagger, hot water from melted snow, and strong liquor. Each surgery was a chorus of screams, biting rags, groans, and each success was toasted like a birth. You went too, not out of courage, but because your left foot started to smell, not like old socks, but like rotting meat mixed with rust, the smell of beyond saving. You sat, took off your boots, your socks, and tapped each toe yourself. 1, 2, 3, no feeling, no pain. You shook your head, then looked at the doctor, the cold-faced man, hands covered in reused bandages. 3 toes, he said. At least, you nodded, and handed him the knife. No one screamed when he cut, just the wind, the grinding of teeth, and the dry snap of something leaving you forever. Then came the wrapping, the liquor poured, and the gasping breath, like being reborn. You learned to walk again. The first 3 days, you fell like a toppled tree. Day 4, you limped a distance. Day 5, you walked without falling, just leaning on a stick. The remaining toes trembled, as if ready to follow their friends. But you kept going, because there was no other way, and because behind you, the snow was already covering the bloodstains. Some didn't cut. They waited for toes to drop like late-season fruit. A Swiss soldier once said, "If the body wants to leave us, let it do so," and it did. We saw him one morning, pulling off his boot, 3 toes falling into the snow like tiny stones. He laughed, then cried, then swallowed his tears, because there was no clean water. One night, you heard someone screaming. A toe's gangrene had spread to the foot. The group held him down, heated an iron in the fire, and seared the ruined foot. The smell of burning flesh filled the tent. Everyone was silent, not out of respect, but because no one knew if tomorrow it'd be their turn. And then, you accepted it. You no longer had enough toes to count the days. You scratched marks on your rifle. Each mark was a survival. Each mark was a piece of your body, sacrificed for Napoleon's grand cause. And in your head, one question remained. How many more parts of me must vanish before I can go home? You don't have an answer. But you know one thing still holds you on the edge of life. Not patriotism, not military honor, but liquor. Yes, liter of liquor in Russia's winter of 1812 equals one more day of living, no more, no less. Liquor is no longer for getting drunk. It's medicine, a blanket, fire. So, the only thing that makes you feel your chest is still warm your heart still beating, and some reason not to crawl into a snowbank and sleep forever. When food supplies ran dry, hardtack turned moldy, and the cold froze the blood in your nose, liquor became your only ally. One small sip, and you feel blood rush back to your remaining fingertips. A big gulp, and you dare to walk 5 more kilometers through snow without screaming. A full bottle, and you believe you're immortal, at least until tonight. But liquor is hard to come by. The first barrels were carried by the supply train, but now the supply train lies scattered somewhere among the icy ravines. All that's left are stray bottles, small flasks, soldiers hide in their coats, stuff in their boots, or, if desperate, tuck in a torn rag tied around their waist like a talisman. You once saw a soldier stab a comrade just for being suspected of sneaking a sip. The other guy died, and in his pocket, no liquor. The stabber said nothing, just collapsed from regret, and cold. A double death, one from a misunderstanding, one from lack of liquor. French soldiers got creative. They boiled rotten turnips with pig fat, fermented it with urine, creating what they called desperation vodka. It wasn't tasty, but after drinking it, you didn't feel the wind anymore. Another group found an old Russian peasant's stash. They broke the door, tore through it, and discovered a barrel of unlabeled liquid. Smelled like liquor, looked like oil, tasted like hell, but they drank. 5 men. An hour later, 3 were blind, 1 went mad, and the last sang the Russian anthem in French before crawling into a fire. Sick, you learned the lesson. Real liquor. You live. Fake liquor. You die. The stupidest death. Some traded their last coat for a bottle. An Italian soldier sold his helmet and died when a rock hit his head later. But he died drunk, so no pain. In the tent, liquor became currency. 1 sip equals sign a dry sock. 2 sips equals sign sleeping in the corner with a windbreak. A whole bottle equals sign someone taking your guard shift for a night. You traded 2. One freezing night, you gave up the scarf your mother gave you before you left. For half a bottle of cider, you drank each drop, like pouring childhood, back into your chest. And when the alcohol spread through your blood, you wept. Not for the scarf, but because, for the first time in weeks, you stopped shivering. But liquor also made you careless. One morning, you woke to find a soldier curled in a snowbank, a broken bottle beside him. The wind still howled, the body still cold. But he was smiling, face pale, teeth broken, but smiling like he'd found paradise. Some chose to die that way, drank until they felt nothing, then fell into the snow like the last rotten leaf of autumn. At least they didn't feel the cruelty anymore. And you started to understand, liquor here wasn't just for living, it was for dying more comfortably. You clutched your bottle like it was your heart. Each sip, a decision, drink to keep going or save it for the end. Some didn't save anything, like Pierre, a supply soldier who miraculously survived. He found a whole jar of liquor hidden in a collapsed cowshed. He should have shared, but he hid it, and drank it all, alone. 3 days later, he was tied to a post, not for punishment, but because he'd drunk himself insane, stripped naked, running through the snow, screaming he was Napoleon, the hairy version. He died that night, face smiling, mouth full of frozen foam, and no one took his bottle, because everyone feared what killed him. But not you. You kept drinking, bit by bit, not to get drunk, not to feel joy, just to remember you were alive. Because when the liquor ran out, hope evaporated too, and you still had a long journey ahead, icy, dark, and filled with souls, frozen as hard as shattered statues. So you hugged your remaining bottle, took a sip, and muttered, "Today, I'll keep breathing one more day." But you didn't know that day would be different, not because it was colder, not because you were hungrier, but because for the first time, you saw them, the Russians, not the trembling peasants fleeing as the French army marched into their village, not the corpses left behind burned houses, but real Russian soldiers, dressed in thick fur coats, holding axes, swords, or anything that could cut your throat. They didn't shout, didn't run, didn't need tactics. They moved slowly, steadily, as if the blizzard itself was carrying them forward. And you stood in a white field, feet numb, hands trembling so much you couldn't load your musket. The first man in your unit didn't die from a bullet. His gun, an old musket, didn't fire. The flint was wet from snow. He stood there, trying to relight it, while a Russian charged like a predator, swinging an axe straight into his head without warning. Blood sprayed onto the snow, like red ink on white silk. And you ran, not out of cowardice, but instinct. Anyone who stayed that day died. No one shouted, "Hold the line." No one yelled fire on command. It was all screams, stomping, dropped weapons, and French soldiers fleeing like rats in a flood. You didn't know how far you ran, only that you fell into a ditch, hiding among dead horses and dirty snow. You held your breath. Your heart pounded like a war drum. And then you saw him, a Russian soldier passing by, bayonet in hand, face expressionless. He looked your way and did nothing, just stood there, waiting for you to move. You didn't move. He turned away, vanished like a ghost. That's when you understood. They weren't soldiers. They were frost in human form, the embodiment of nature's wrath against invaders. No need for advanced gear, no need for Napoleon. They had the land, the wind, the snow, and hate. Afterward, the whole regiment buzzed about the encounter. Some swore they saw Cossacks on horseback charging like thunder, lopping off heads like snapping dry branches. Others claimed Russian soldiers didn't die. They fell, then stood up after 3 minutes. One man said he shot a Russian square in the chest. The man fell, then crawled up, smiled, and chased him like a hellhound. Rumors spread faster than malaria. They don't sleep. They eat their enemies. They can smell fear. You didn't know what was true, but you knew you were afraid. Not of death, you were used to that, but of being torn apart by those with no eyes, no pain, no limits. One night, you woke to screams. A group of Russians raided the camp. You heard knives slashing, axes chopping wood, men begging for mercy. No one was spared. You hid behind a supply cart, holding your breath, clutching a useless musket. In the dark, you saw a figure approach, black cloak, matted hair, face white as snow. He stopped, looked around, then left. At that moment you thought, if I survive tonight, I'll never believe in victory again. And you were right. From that day, everyone knew, fighting men, you had a chance. But fighting Russia, its wind, its soldiers, you were just a breathing corpse waiting to be buried. After that, your captain, the one who drilled strict formations, vanished. They said he was beheaded, his body dragged through the snow like a sack. No one looked for him, not out of fear, but because it was pointless. A new sergeant took over. He said one thing: see a Russian, run. See snow, dodge. See both, kneel and pray. God spares your soul. That became the official order. You memorized it, carved it into your mind, and from that day, whenever you saw a dark figure moving silently on the horizon, you ran like the devil was after you. You didn't shoot, didn't shout, didn't challenge, because you knew they weren't human, and you weren't whole enough to be a hero. But if you weren't a hero, and the enemy was a demon, then who would lead you out of this white hell? That's when the question started spreading through the ranks like damp gunpowder smoke. Where is General Napoleon? At first, it was whispered, as if someone accidentally muttered, "It's been weeks since we saw him." Then another added, "Has anyone seen him stand in the snow? Has anyone seen him eat moldy porridge?" Then an old soldier said quietly, "He's somewhere in a warm palace." And that sentence sank into everyone's minds, like a drop of ink in a bucket of cold water, spreading, seeping, impossible to wash out. You once believed Napoleon led the charge, that he rode ahead, guiding the army through frozen lands with courage and genius. But now, looking down at your feet, boots patched with horse tendons, your left big toe half rotted, you started to doubt. If he was really here, where was he sleeping? What was he eating? How cold was he? Why were soldiers like you dying daily while he was invisible? Then the rumor exploded like fireworks in the night. Napoleons fled back to France. Some swore they saw a sleigh convoy quietly leave the main camp, heading for Poland. Others said he disguised himself as a peasant to escape the ranks. Some claimed Napoleon was dead, and now an imposter was in charge. And you weren't sure anymore. You only knew the one ordering the march wasn't lying in the frozen mud beside you. He didn't see Pierre trip from a broken foot, then get trampled by the army like a straw sack. He didn't hear the choked sobs of a young soldier dying from choking on blood while swallowing dirty snow to ease hunger. One night, you crawled into a tent where a young officer, fresh from Paris, had just arrived. He wore a clean coat, hair slicked, still carrying a silk scarf. He spoke calmly, like he was in a tea house. He said, "You're not to ask where General Napoleon is. The general has greater duties. He's coordinating strategy." Strategy. You wanted to scream in his face. What strategy? The strategy of eating horse dung to survive. The strategy of tying a handkerchief around a stump when a toe falls off. But you didn't speak. You just nodded, then turned away. Because you knew words were useless. Faith was now a luxury rarer than dried meat. And since losing faith, you marched like a ghost. No longer a soldier serving the nation, but a creature dragging its body through white snow, clinging to the faint hope that tomorrow might be warmer. But it wasn't warmer. The wind still cut. The cold still seeped into your marrow. And General Napoleon, he still didn't appear. Some said he was in Smolensk, others said Vilnius. An old man swore he was writing memoirs, right now in a tent lined with mink fur. That night, in a moment, you almost believed the worst, that he never intended to stay with you to the end, that you were just a pawn thrown away in a historic gamble where the main player had quietly slipped away. You lay among comrades, hearing them moan, cough, snore, cry in their sleep, and you looked up at the tent roof, whispering, "If you're really still here, let me know." But nothing answered, except the sound of falling snow, and the growl of your stomach, hungry again. The next morning, you woke earlier than usual, not because of hope, but because a rat bit your foot while you slept, and in the moment you chased it off. You thought, "Where's Napoleon while this rat is here?" But then you stopped asking, not because you had an answer, but because you were too busy chewing something your brain tried to convince you was bread, except it wasn't bread. It was a lump of dirt. A lump of dirt pressed tight, sun-dried, lightly roasted over coals, mixed with straw, roots, sometimes hair or torn cloth. And when you bit into it, it crumbled like fine sand in your mouth. And you still ate it. You chewed like it was the foie gras your mother made for Easter. You held it, swallowed it, washed it down with a sip of grey melted snow, then sighed. Because you know what, in -30-degree cold with a stomach empty for nearly a week, a roasted lump of dirt was truly one of the grandest feasts you could hope for. Soldiers in the unit started calling it Napoleon's bread, not because he invented it, but because it was the only thing left under his command you could chew. Some jokingly called it pain de désespoir, the bread of despair, and it was. Every day, a group scraped soft dirt from around tree roots, usually mixed with old horse dung, ash, leftover trash. They kneaded it, pressed it, rolled it, flattened it, and dried it. Some used broken stove pieces to lightly toast the surface. Others tucked it under their armpits to cure it with body heat. You joked, this dish, back in Paris, might get a Michelin star if rated on a scale of misery. And then, like everything in this army, dirt bread became currency. 1 lump equals sign half a sock. 2 lumps equals sign sitting near the fire. 3 lumps equals sign a sip of old liquor from a bamboo tube. But some couldn't stomach it. Some ate too much, and their guts reacted like poured concrete. Some writhed in pain for 3 nights, then died from constipation. Another vomited blood after eating dirt with glass shards. You knew this, you saw it, but you still ate, because there was no other choice. One afternoon, you caught a group digging the foundation of a ruined house, cheering when they found a treasure, a sack of old dirt, full of dried cow dung and bark. To you, that was the smell of life. You begged for a handful, pressed it together, and dipped it in snow water. The mixture melted in your mouth like shame mixed with gratitude. Some said, eating dirt fills your stomach, stops the hunger. Others said, I chew to remember I once ate real bread. And you didn't need a reason anymore. You ate because your hands were better at shaping dirt than firing a gun. You once saw an old soldier hide a dirt lump under his hat like treasure. When caught, he bit off half the hat to avoid sharing. His eyes were red as blood, and no one dared approach. Another time, you saw a man die in the tent, mouth still full of unchewed dirt crumbs, and the man beside him, not a comrade, not a friend, quietly took the rest, tucked it in his pocket. You didn't find it disgusting anymore, just logical. All standards melted like ice underfoot. All morals were a luxury for those with full stomachs. And you, a man with only 3 toes and an empty stomach, just needed something to bite, to gnaw, to survive. One gloomy morning, you found a strange package wrapped in oilcloth. Your heart raced. You thought, maybe real bread. Your hands trembled as you opened it, and it was real bread, but green with mold, reeking, mixed with rat hair. You stared at it for a long time, then wrapped it back up, set it down, and turned away. For the first time in weeks, you chose not to eat, not out of nobility, but because you feared real bread would make you remember real taste, and you didn't want to. You weren't strong enough to remember. You just needed roasted dirt, tasteless, nameless, emotionless, like you now, and you kept going, with a stomach full of dirt, a heart full of frost, and eyes no longer dreaming of Paris or family, just dreaming of a day you could eat something softer than dirt, warmer than snow, and free of rat hair. Just dreaming of a day you could eat something softer than dirt, and warmer than snow, and free of rat hair. But warmth, something you once took for granted in your old life, had become a luxury rarer than beef. The one thing you craved more than food, more than news of Napoleon, more than a day without diarrhea, was heat. And then, one fateful day, while scavenging through a parched forest and frozen wasteland, you saw it, a sharp steeple, a cross, a grey stone wall, a small church, abandoned, moss-covered, cracked by time and wind, but standing firm in the snow, like a ghost of dead faith. And the first to speak was Benoit, the soldier who swore he'd never disrespect God. "Can we burn a church?" No one answered, but no one objected. Everyone looked at the smoke rising from frozen arms, at the imaginary fire burning in each other's eyes. You stepped into the church, cold, musty, cracked walls, broken windows, mossy and rat-dung-covered stone floors, but dry, no wind. And you knew, if you could start a fire here, you'd survive tonight. Not as a human, just not frozen to death. A group of soldiers dismantled the altar, a solid oak slab carved with saints, beautiful, intricate, and cold as stone. They pried off pieces, broke statue legs, dragged plywood to a pile in the nave. Others raided the sacristy, grabbing altar cloths, even bell ropes to burn. Someone found a Bible, thick paper, sharply printed, and then, page by page, it was torn out, rolled up, used as kindling. One man lit the fire with the passage, "The Lord is my light and my salvation." Everyone's faces were silent, not from fear, but because there was nothing left to say. You sat, held your hands near the flames, feeling your skin, cracked and scabbed, begin to loosen. You moaned softly, not from pain, but because, for the first time in weeks, you felt your skin was alive. No one prayed, no one bowed. God wasn't here, only fire, smoke, and people waiting for dawn. Then a noise from behind. A rat scurried past. Someone shouted. Another drew a knife, stabbing into the dark. Tension. Everyone feared Russians would follow the smoke, but no one came. Maybe God had abandoned this place too. You stood, walked to the Virgin Mary statue. Its face was chipped, paint peeling, looking like a blind old woman. You touched its hand, cold as a gravestone. You whispered, "Sorry," then broke off its arm, good wood, and brought it to the fire. No one blamed you. Someone else found an old organ, dismantling its metal pipes to melt snow in. The clanging echoed like a funeral bell for us all. That night, some dreamed of home, mothers singing hymns, bread baking in ovens, roasted chicken on tables. But then they woke, to the smell of smoke, coughing, and the sight of the Virgin's hand burned to ash. Someone sat quietly, writing in dried blood on the wall, "Lord, if you won't save us, stop watching." No one laughed, no one argued, and the next morning, snow fell thicker, colder, whiter, but at least you survived another night. In a church without God, without sanctity, without faith, but with wood and wood. Right now was the only miracle left. Because where there was fire, there were still people. But fire doesn't burn forever. Wood runs out, and when the cold returned, swift and merciless, as if last night's light never warmed your soul, you knew, not the Russians, not hunger, not disease, but the cold was the true commander of this war, and the fiercest battles weren't on the front lines, not in snowy fields or bloody ambushes. They were in the small tent, The shared tent of 7 survivors, huddled together each night, like breathing rags, each clinging to the last scraps of warmth from others' bodies. You learned the unspoken rule: the one in the middle survives. The one on the edge loses toes. One night, a soldier named Lewis lay on the edge, and the next morning, he didn't wake. His eyes were open, hands still clutching a blanket scrap, like it was life itself, but his chest no longer rose. We didn't cry, just dragged his body out, quickly filling the empty spot. Some split Louis' belt cord, others took his boots, but his boots were hard as stone, and no one could fit them. And the next night, when the fire died, and the wind hissed through the tent seams, everyone shivered. One man, you don't recall his name, pulled out a wool sock from under a torn blanket, new, thick, warm, and that's when hell broke loose. Another shouted, "That's my sock. I hid it under my pillow." The other snapped, "I found it. No name. No one owns anything here." The argument turned to yells, then curses, then a punch. A sis. Something heavy flew, and in a space no bigger than an overturned cart, 7 gaunt, ragged, hungry, desperate men tore into each other like rats cornered in a trap. You didn't want to fight, but you couldn't stay still when a hand yanked your coat off your body. You kicked, you swung, you screamed. Teeth broke, blood spilled, someone groaned, and then it stopped when one body went still. Someone panted, he's not breathing. Silence. No one spoke. We didn't know who it was. No one wanted to know. Everyone just pulled back, quietly creating a gap between the body and the rest. Then each returned to their spot, snatching what they'd won: a blanket scrap, a straw pillow, the sock that started the fight. No one apologized. No one explained. The next morning, the body was dragged out, laid in the snowy yard. An hour later, someone returned, stripped its coat. Half an hour later, the boots were gone. By noon, someone broke off 2 arm bones, said they could make a spoon or knife handle, and so, that man became part of the nameless chain of objects, serving the rest. You watched without horror, just logic, because you were the same. If you'd been a bit weaker, a bit slower last night, you'd be the one under that ice. You grew wary, trusted no one, never slept deeply. Night after night, you clutched your belongings like they were your soul. In that small tent, where every breath was a threat, every noise a signal of a new theft, you lived like a talking beast, and you started to understand, out there might be Russians, frost, avalanches, but in this cramped space, among so-called comrades, you had to fight to keep the last shred of humanity left. And sometimes, you weren't even sure you were still human, and then your body reminds you, human or not, it still has needs, it still digests, it still fills up, it still needs to relieve itself. And that's when you realize one of the cruelest truths of a Russian winter at -30 degrees. Taking a shit is a life or death journey. You have no latrine, no toilet paper, no light. You have wind, you have snow, you have a stomach screaming like a rabid beast, and you have one choice: go outside or let it happen in your pants and sleep with it all night, until both the stench and your last shred of pride freeze into stone. The first time you go out, it's a night of howling wind, like a banshee's wail. You wrap your coat around yourself like a cocoon, hand clutching your stomach, eyes bleary from lack of sleep. One hand holds a knife, not for defense, but to tap your boots whenever you feel your toes go numb too long.
You don't go far.
Just a few steps from the tent. You know too far means getting lost, and getting lost now means freezing to death after a slip, with no one bothering to look for you. You pick a fallen tree, your face twists. Taking off your pants in the cold takes 5 minutes. The wind stabs through your coat's gaps like needles. Your hands shake so much you can't hold a weapon. Then, as you squat, the wind shifts. A gust hits sideways, throwing you off balance, making you stumble, face planting into the snow. What you meant to release is no longer under control, and there you lie, wet, cold, humiliated, reeking in the dark, with your last scrap of dignity dissolving into vapor. Another soldier, Jean, didn't make it outside. He did it right in the tent, in a rusty pot used to melt snow. The next morning, the group beat him nearly to death, because no one dared boil water anymore. Another invented, carve ice into a seat, dig a pit beneath, light a fire nearby. The first sit was warm. The second, the pit was clogged with frozen ice. The third, his ass stuck to the ice. They had to pour warm urine-mixed water to free him. He never spoke to anyone again after that. A Polish soldier got creative. He strung a rope between two trees and called it the royal latrine. Problem was, when he sat, his ass swung in the wind like a death knell. One night, the wind was too strong. The rope snapped. He fell headfirst into the pit. No one dared save him. By morning, only his legs stuck up like two funeral candles. You once thought being human was noble, but here, being human just means feeling cold, shivering, and suffering when you pull down your pants in weather that could kill a grown ox. You develop a skill, do it in 20 seconds. If not, the consequence is frostbite. Your fingertips could fall off just for trying to wipe clean. One day, you used a rag, but it froze solid right after wiping, and you, instead of washing it, threw it straight into the fire. Sometimes you wonder, how did Napoleon relieve himself back then? Did he shiver behind a tree, face purple, hands clutching his stomach, feet buried in frozen shit? Or did he have a gilded bucket, with a servant holding a cloth? No one answers that question. All you know is that you, and hundreds of thousands of others, face the greatest enemy of the campaign. The invisible toilet of a Russian winter. One day, you discover shit traps, snow mounds with a different color. Someone relieved themselves and covered it with snow. You step in one. Your boot sinks. The smell rises. You scream like you've been stabbed. And you learn from now on, watch the ground more carefully than the enemy. The worst is when diarrhea returns. You have no control, no choice. Each stomach cramp is a race against death. Find a secluded spot. Undress fast enough. Keep your balance. Avoid snow covering you. And above all, pray you don't die squatting. Because if you die like that, you'll be remembered not for courage, but as the guy who collapsed in a shit ditch, and no one dared touch his body for 3 days. And as you sit there, curled up, in the freezing wind, pants half down, are stuck to snow, holding a knife to scare off bears, but really to scare yourself from going mad, you realize this isn't war anymore. It's a cruel comedy where the price of survival is trading privacy, dignity, and the belief that humans have something called self-respect. But you keep going, keep living, keep finding new spots to take care of business. Because even if the sky freezes, the wind cuts your skin, the tent is cramped, and you're nothing but skin and bones, your guts still work. And when they rumble, you become a French soldier, trudging through a blizzard, searching for a dry tree, to do something more sacred and humiliating than any battle, take a shit. But that's just one way your body slowly falls apart in this white death. Because in the end, what kills you isn't a Russian's knife, a stray bullet, or shrapnel from the front. What kills you is the wind, the cold, the despair, and a disease that needs no germs, no contagion, no diagnosis. It only needs you to exist long enough in this place. You might call it pneumonia, maybe tuberculosis, or maybe a simpler name, slow death. One morning, you wake to the man beside you shaking like he's possessed. He coughs violently, each cough a knife tearing his chest. You turn away, not from disgust, but because you fear you'll start coughing too. And just days later, you do. First, a light hack, then deeper, then blood. Each cough feels like your ribs might snap. Your chest burns like someone stuffed hot coals inside. But you keep going, keep marching, keep trembling, like a broken machine. An officer told you, the wind doesn't kill. He died 2 days later, his face frozen stiff, nose crusted with blood, eyes wide like he'd seen something too horrific. Another fell ill, after lying on ice all night, kicked out of the tent for farting too loudly. A laughable reason, but the cost was his life. He ran a fever, rambled, sang the French anthem in Polish, then went silent. No one knew his name. They just called him the one whose last sound had a tune. The disease spread faster than a curse, not contagious, but everyone got it because no one could withstand the cold and hunger for over a month, with no medicine, no bed, no warmth, no hope. Your eyes turn yellow, your hands turn green, your chest feels heavy like it's strapped with stones, and your mind starts drifting elsewhere. You hear your mother's voice, your father's, smell bread from your village's wood stove, but when you snap back, you're lying in a snowfield, mouth open, dried blood on your lips, and a rat gnawing your boot. You breathe, like a machine running on miracles. But each breath is a negotiation with death. Some choose not to breathe anymore, like George's. One morning he woke, sat up, smiled at you, and said, "I see the light." Then he lay back down, never to rise again. Others fought to the end, piling on blankets, rubbing on oil, rendered from horse fat, drinking boiled snow. Some stuffed dry grass on their chests. Others lay so close to the fire they burned their stomachs. But in the end, the only cure was hope, and that was the first thing to vanish. You see one man raving, another muttering, another laughing in his sleep, before quietly stopping breathing. One by one, no blood spilled, no screams, just fading, like the warmth from your skin each night. One soldier swore he'd never get sick. Every day, he bathed in snow. Every night, he exercised in the yard. One day, he collapsed mid-push-up. When someone lifted him, he only said, "I forgot, you can't fight the air itself," then died. You start fearing silence, because every time the camp goes quieter than usual, someone has died in their sleep. You learn to watch your comrades closely. Are their lips still pink? Are they breathing? Any new blood by their mouth? You stop asking, "You okay?" You ask, "Still feverish? Still pissing blood? Can you still stand?" And if someone says no, you know they're about to go. If they don't answer, you quietly search their pockets. Take their rag, their boots, their cord, like a farewell ritual. No one cries, no one lights candles, no masses, no bugles, just snow, wind, and a pile of wet cloth, soaked in sweat and dried blood, and you're still alive. Somehow, some part of you. But you know if the cold lasts a few more weeks, if your stomach stays empty, if your eyes keep blurring day by day, you'll slip out of this game too, quietly like the others. Because in Russia that year, death didn't need to kill, it just waited, and disease didn't need germs, just cold wind, and a heart that stopped believing in spring. But there's something more dangerous than death, something you can't strangle, can't dodge, can't steal boots from and run. It lives in your head, eating your memories, twisting reality, making you unsure what's real and what's a dream. The hallucinations of a starving mind. It starts quietly. One morning, you wake, thinking you heard church bells from your village. But there's no church here, just a half-eaten horse carcass and crows waiting for the rest. You blink. No bells, just the wind wailing like someone crying far away. That night, you dream you're at a table, facing a plate of beef and wine sauce, beside crusty bread, and your mother smiling gently, ladling more soup into your bowl. You lean down, breathe deeply, but the aroma is the stench of your own gangrenous foot. You wake, coughing and crying, realizing you were licking the bottom of your helmet, thinking it was a plate. A soldier beside you watches, says nothing. He's been there too. Hallucinations don't come on schedule. They come when you're exhausted, when you're so hungry your teeth grind uncontrollably. Once, you saw a snow-covered hill and swore it was a giant cheese wheel. You convinced two other soldiers to follow. All three slid down the slope in desperation, only to find it was a frozen pile of horse dung. One still ate it, and no one blamed him. One day, you thought you were Napoleon. Really. You stood on a mound shouting, commanding imaginary troops, waving your arms, yelling "Vive la France," until you collapsed from exhaustion. When you woke, your pants were wet, face crusted with snow, and a 14-year-old scout, the youngest in the unit, was hugging your leg, crying, thinking you were real. You can't control sleep anymore. It comes like waves, crashing, when you barely blink. Sometimes you fall asleep while walking, still moving, still stepping, but eyes closed, and you dream. You dream you're bathing in a hot tub, someone washing your hair, scented candles, music. Then you wake, wading through muddy snow. The candle scent is half-burned human flesh. The music is a comrade's dying sobs. A soldier named Baptiste was caught giggling to himself for an hour. When asked why, he only said, "I'm talking to my old bread." 3 days later, he vanished into the forest. No one looked. They only found footprints leading to a deep ice pit and scrawled words on a tree. "Don't follow me. The bread doesn't like crowds." You start fearing sleep, because in sleep, you live for real. You eat, hear music, talk to lost loved ones, and when you wake, it all vanishes, like it never existed. The pain of waking isn't in your stomach, but your heart. One man whispered, "I hope I don't wake up." And the next morning, he got his wish. One night, you dream you're flying. No snow, no cold, no war. You soar over Paris rooftops, the Seine, the walls of your own memories, and you laugh, like you haven't since setting foot in Russia. But when you fall, you wake convulsing, cold, hungry, and a new bout of diarrhea screaming. You crawl outside, sit on a rock, and cry. For the first time in weeks, you cry not for dying, but for living too long in this delirium. Your comrades dream too. Some talk all night, some scream, thinking they're burning. One kissed a corpse, mistaking it for an old lover. A German soldier stopped mid-march, knelt in the snow, and proposed to a tree stump. He never returned to the group. That tree must be married by now. You wonder what's reality: the stinking tent, the endless groans, or the dream of a bakery with buttery croissants and hot café au lait. The answer doesn't matter anymore, because each day the real world slips further away, and the world in your head, mad, sweet, seductive, grows more tempting. You're no longer a soldier. You're a sleepwalker in the frost, living on illusions and hunger, breathing on false hope and warped memories. And if one day you lie down, eyes open, mouth smiling, hand raised like holding a steaming loaf, please don't wake me, because there, I'm full, I'm alive, and I'm no longer cold, but that's only in dreams. When you open your eyes, reality slaps you with a freezing gust, the rasping cough of the man beside you, and the smell of frozen sweat, human waste, rotting feet, dried blood, and smoke from things no one should burn. In that world, there's one item that's not a weapon, not rations, not a map, but fought over, coveted, cherished like treasure. A rag. Yes, a rag. It doesn't need to be clean, doesn't need to smell good, doesn't need to be pretty. Just a piece of cloth, soft enough, long enough, and not yet rotted. And if you're wondering, why is a rag worth more than a sword? Try taking a shit in -30 degrees without one. Or try bandaging your foot when leather straps have rotted, socks are torn, and gauze is something only seen in Parisian medical textbooks. Or simpler, try sleeping without something to cover your ears, shield your face, wrap your neck, cushion your head, stuff your boots, or block snow from creeping into your armpits. Then you'll understand why, when someone dies, the first thing taken isn't their gun, but their rag. You've seen two men fight to the blood over a brown rag mixed with rat hair. One got stabbed in the arm, but instead of bandaging, he stuffed the wound with the rag he'd just won, and then both lay in the tent, shivering. But the one with the rag slept first. The other stayed up all night, staring. You once traded a sip of liquor for a piece of rag torn from a German soldier's underwear. You didn't care about its origin anymore, just that it didn't freeze. One soldier pulled a rag from a corpse, washed it in snow, dried it with body heat, and folded it carefully like a keepsake. Each night, he tucked it under his cheek, calling it his Paris pillow. And that night, he slept soundly. You once had a rag from your mother. She gave it to you the day you left, folded neatly, smelling of lavender. But after 2 weeks, it was filthy, moldy, blood-stained, and you used it to wipe the nose of a dying comrade. Where it is now, you don't remember. Maybe wrapped around someone's neck you've never met. Maybe burning in a fire. Maybe lining a knife handle. Wherever it is, it left you like everything else. One man wrapped all his possessions in a rag, a crumb of hard bread, 3 fallen toes, a half-written note, and a smudged little picture. When he died, the bundle was split 3 ways: bread for the hungry, toes for a sick joke, paper for kindling. Only the rag. No one dared cut it, because it was the last thing holding those fragments together. During a march, you saw a man lose his boots. Wind bit his feet, blood froze. You gave him the rag around your neck. He wrapped his feet, kept going. A week later, he died, but they said he never complained of pain, because the rag did what boots, uniforms, and weapons couldn't, gave a fleeting sense that someone once helped him. A young, arrogant officer once said, "If soldiers value rags, how can they win a war?" The next day, he caught a cold, coughed non-stop, then choked on blood. No one gave him a rag. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve until it frayed like straw. 3 days later, he died of suffocation. They said, not from the cold, but from no rag. That phrase spread like a dark mantra. You started seeing rags as gold, no longer for wiping sweat, but a talisman, medicine, the only shield between you and madness. And when you sat curled up in the tent, wrapping it around your neck, hands gripping its ends like hugging a loved one, you knew you'd sooner lose your weapon than this rag. Because tonight, fighting Russians is tomorrow's problem. Tonight, your enemies are cold, hunger, the cough clawing your chest, and the darkness creeping through each breath. And only the rag, mundane, filthy, tattered, reminds you you're still human, or at least you once were. But humans need someone to lead them, need orders, need structure, need someone to shout forward, so they know to lift their feet. Yet for 3 weeks, no orders came from command. No one blew a whistle, no one drew march routes, no one checked ranks, counted heads, or issued alerts. When no one gives orders, who leads the army? The answer is no one, or rather, everyone, in a chaotic, desperate, instinctual way, like starving wolves, seeking a path out of a burning forest. Low-ranking officers were either dead, fled, or split off. Squad leaders were now the lucky soldiers, not yet wasted by diarrhea, and still strong enough to shout louder than others. In a group of 10, the strongest became the new officer. No vote, no medals, no consensus. Just stand up, point at the snow, and say, "Go this way." If no one objects, he's in charge. You followed a man like that once. His name was Luke, a barrel maker, from Marseille, loud, broad-shouldered, bug-eyed, voice like thunder. He couldn't read maps, but he knew where fires were, where dead soldiers' boots lay, which abandoned villagers might have salt. When someone asked, "Where next?" he'd spit on the ground, shrug toward the smoke, and the group followed. But then Luke fought a young soldier over a dead chicken. He swung a knife, blood sprayed, the soldier fell, and suddenly, everyone turned to look at him. No one followed his orders anymore. That night, he was tied up, the fire in his eyes snuffed out like a wet match. The next morning, he was gone. No one asked. Some said rats took him, others smirked. Maybe that chicken came back for revenge. And so, each small group became a survival squad, with no flag, no ideals, just makeshift rules. Whoever finds wood sleeps near the fire. Whoever gets liquor picks the spot. Whoever has dirt bread stays quiet to avoid theft. No authority, no duty, and above all, no one dared call themselves leader, because leaders were the first to die when things went wrong. You saw a young officer in white gloves try to restore order. He shouted, banged a stick on a barrel, ordered rifles up, men to turn. 5 minutes later, a shot rang out. A soldier said, "I thought he was a Russian." Everyone nodded, kept moving. No one asked more. You recall a group of Germans and Italians arguing all afternoon over which map was right. In the end, the map was burned to cook bark porridge, and the group split in two. One went west, one south. Both vanished. And you start to understand, it's not the leader who holds power, it's whoever survives, whoever has wood, whoever has a rag, whoever has liquor, whoever's mind is clear enough to avoid diseased corpses, whoever's sane enough to know when to bow, when to play mute, when to laugh along with the arguing crowd, to avoid being hated. There was a man you once looked down on, Humry, scrawny, face pocked with smallpox scars, 3 teeth left, but he survived uncannily long, never gave orders, rarely spoke, yet every day, he had food, dry cloth, a place to sleep. When asked how he survived, he shrugged. I know when not to get involved. And slowly, men like him became the pivot of the group, not leaders, but centers. Want to go somewhere? Ask him. Want to stay? Get his nod, because he knew how to live in the shadows, unnoticed, leaving no tracks. And that's a skill only those half-dead learn. You start copying him. You stop arguing, stop shouting slogans, stop asking, where's the general? When do we retreat? What's the strategy? You ask only 3 things. Who's got liquor? Where's the fire lit? Which way's the wind blowing tonight? And so, you live. No superiors, no flag, no France, just footsteps crunching on ice, trailing through winter like lost ants, each going its own way, but all heading to one final destination. Either find an escape, or melt into the snow, like you never existed. And at some point, you realize, no one commands the army anymore, because there is no army, just lone souls, struggling in silence, blending into the cold smoke, hoping tomorrow brings less wind, or at least one more rag. But if you have no rag, no liquor, no wood, no fire, you still have to live, by any means. And here, any means includes using a human as a heater. No, not throwing them into the fire, not burning them alive, but using the warmth from someone wounded, weaker, immobile, like living coal, to heat those still strong enough to shiver. Sounds inhuman? Yes, but in a place where all morality is buried under snow, where every principle is just kindling for a fire, the most inhuman thing is still believing in humanity. The first time you saw it was on a foggy, freezing night in a collapsed wooden shack. 4 men huddled together, and one, Adrian, wounded in the leg, unable to move, breathing in wheezes, nearly delirious. Instead of covering him with a blanket, the other 3 dragged him to the center, stripped his outer coat, and clung to him like a hot water bottle. One wrapped arms around Adrian's chest, another rested a head on his stomach, the last pressed against his back, legs over thighs. Adrian moaned. No one reacted. They closed their eyes, counting his breaths, like embers in a dying fire. By morning, Adrian was dead, but the other 3 lived, their skin pinker, hands and feet moving again. One even hummed softly while tying his boots. No one mentioned last night. No one said thank you. No one said sorry. From then on, the human heater became an unspoken tactic among survivor groups. A wounded man, if still warm, had value. If cold, discarded. Some even started judging others by their warmth. A young soldier, wounded in the arm, lay motionless for 2 days, warmed by 5 men taking turns sleeping beside him, 2-hour shifts, then switch. They didn't bandage him, didn't ask how he was, just checked his temperature. When his stomach went cold, they left. He died hours later. You saw a fight break out because a sick man was hugged too long at night. 2 soldiers argued over who got to lie next to him, then fought with iron spoons. The sick man opened his eyes, saw the scene, and wept, then passed out in the arms of the winner, the one who'd just bloodied the other's lip to claim warmth. You used a wounded man too, not because you were cruel, but because you didn't want to die. One night, you were so cold, you couldn't move. A soldier named Felix, hit by a wood splinter in the gut, lay delirious nearby. You dragged him close, held him tight, like a pile of freshly dried clothes. Faint warmth radiated from his chest. You placed your hand on his heart, counting beats, like counting your own remaining life. Each thump was another hour alive. By morning he weakened. You knew what was coming, but you held on for 1 more hour, a little longer, one last time. Then you let go, folded your clothes, stood up, and never looked back. Some groups even assigned roles. The wounded became the heat source, the healthier ones, the watchers. Those still able to cook were the human fire stokers. All worked in silence. No one objected. A man with both legs broken was placed in the center of a tent. Anyone wanting warmth had to queue, lie beside him for exactly 3 hours, then yield. He lived longer than most. Someone joked, he's the team's most durable coal. When he died, the tent fell silent. No one spoke, but that night, no one slept. Not from grief, but because there was no one left to hold. You started looking at the dying differently. No longer pity, not fear, but calculation. How long will he stay warm? How many minutes can I lie beside him before he's cold? Should I share with comrades, or keep him for myself? And if he wakes, will he be angry? If he doesn't, can I take his scarf too? You never thought you'd become this person, but in that frozen Russian wasteland, where all values burned away, where life and death were separated by a torn blanket and a still breathing body, you weren't human anymore. You were a battery running dry, and anyone still giving off heat was a potential charger. And you knew tomorrow night, if you're wounded, weak, delirious, someone will hold you, not out of love, but because they need your warmth to live. And you'll let them, because you understand, because you've been them, and because, at least that warmth will let you die without shivering. In the Russian campaign, no one taught you how to pull a trigger with frozen fingers, but you learned to measure trust by the warmth of another's skin. And when everything else was buried under snow, one raw truth echoed in your mind. Humans are the last source of heat, and when the coals die out, people turn to people. No one spoke of victory anymore. No one mentioned France. No one believed they'd return. But in the eerie silence of the white forest, on moonless nights, when the wind cut straight into your mind, something fragile, gentle, sudden, began to emerge. A voice, thin, trembling, on the verge of breaking, but real, human. The first sound in weeks that wasn't coughing, dragging footsteps, or the wind howling like a beast. The last songs began like that. At first, a single line, a short verse, a lullaby. No one dared sing loudly, just whispers, as if afraid to wake the death lying beside them. Some sang while pressed between two cold corpses, still clutching a torn rag. Some sang while roasting stones for fake porridge, stirring and murmuring an old lullaby their mother sang. Some sat in an empty tent, feet bleeding, lips cracked, yet still managed to utter "A la Claire Fontaine" before choking on a cough midline. But then, like a reflex, another voice joined in. Another sang along. A word, a chorus, and for a fleeting moment, amid 1,000 reasons to stay silent, everyone sang. No one sang well. No one knew all the words. Some missed the beat. Some mumbled new lyrics. Some cried mid-verse. But all joined, not for joy, but because when you sing, you remember you're human. You remember sitting in a classroom, singing at church, standing in a market, holding someone's hand under a balcony, and believing in something brighter, warmer, kinder. Some sang marching songs. Some sang children's tunes. Some sang in French. Others in German, Italian, Polish. No one understood the words, but the melodies were the same, sad, slow, unwilling to end. One night, in a half-burned wooden shack, someone started Frère Jacques, like it was a prayer. The group sat in a circle around an unburied corpse, singing as if calling his soul back. No one cried, no one laughed, just voices rising, in a cold that wanted to shatter hearts. You thought you couldn't sing. But one night, when your last toe began to rot, you sat propped against a sandbag, head slumped on a dying soldier's shoulder, and suddenly sang, "Sur le pont d'Avignon." No one responded, but that soldier, Émile, grabbed your hand, and that was enough. Once, a group sang all night. They sat by a horse carcass, using its bones as stools, singing and beating the bones like drums. By morning, all were frozen dead, but their faces still smiled. They said, at least they didn't die in silence. Those songs were never written down. No sheet music, no choir conductor, but they existed, ringing out amid blood and pus, wind and shit, liquor fumes and last words. Sometimes, a single line sung would make the whole tent stop to listen. Listen like the dying awaiting church bells. No one demanded it, no one forbade it, because everyone knew, as long as someone sang, someone lived. You heard an old officer sing, La Marseillaise, in a voice so hoarse, it was barely a whisper. He sang alone, hands trembling, eyes closed, as if seeing a crowded square waving flags. But he stopped at O's arms, citoyens, not because he forgot the words, but because no one could hold a weapon anymore. You saw a Polish soldier sing a lullaby while burying his best friend in the snow. No coffin, no ceremony, just a song, and snow falling steadily, like a piano backing his farewell. Those last songs weren't for rallying, not for morale, but for signaling that someone was leaving, that these were final words, that they'd once sung, once existed. And one day, you found yourself singing in a dream, words unclear, rhythm off. But you heard your voice, young, frail, painfully real. You sang for the dead, for your dying self, for the next person to take your place, shivering, seeking warmth in an old tune. Because when all is lost, when weapons rot, fires die, rags tear, when you have no flesh left to warm each other, the last thing you can give is a song, a tattered, off-key song, but enough to keep someone's heart beating one more time. And if tomorrow you don't wake, let that song carry you away. No drums, no bugles, just a soft verse in Russia's graveyard cold. But even music can't save you from the cruelest question of this cold. A question no one dares voice, but lingers in every glance, every shiver at night, every hand quietly gripping a rusty knife. The question is killing one person to stay warm for a night worth it? You once thought never. You believed you'd freeze before harming a comrade, but a Russian winter doesn't ask your opinion. It strangles you with cold and whispers. You choose, you or him. It began one night, in a cramped tent. 7 men, a dying fire, no wood, no liquor, no songs, just one man, Sharg, strangely healthy. Pink skin, steady breaths, strong heartbeat. Had the thickest coat, nearly intact socks, and a wolf fur blanket he found on a dead officer. Everyone watched him. No one spoke. Sharg knew. He stayed up all night, hand on his knife, eyes wide. By morning, he was gone. No one saw him leave, but a trail of blood stretched from his spot to the camp's edge. Only the blanket and socks remained. You wondered, did someone do it, or did Sharg leave first? And if someone did kill him, did they regret it? You thought about it. Then, another night, when the cold pierced your spine, you lay beside a 16-year-old soldier. He was burning with fever, delirious, body like a furnace. You held him, not out of pity, but because he was warm. Each minute, you felt your blood flow again, heart steady, eyelids stop trembling, and then you felt, craving that warmth like you craved liquor, like you craved life. For a moment you wondered, if the boy dies, his body will cool, but if you keep him just dying all night, what then? You shuddered. The thought was vile, but it was real. It lived in your mind like a germ waiting to spread. You let the boy go, sat up, gasping. You wanted to run into the wind, to let the cold slap you awake. But the wind laughed. It said, "You'll hold another corpse soon enough." Days later, a shocking incident. In a tent to the east, a man was found with his throat cut. Nothing missing, except his thermal shirt. The tent claimed he killed himself, but his wrists had no cuts, eyes still open, the knife wound deep to the bone. No one investigated. No one hunted the killer. Everyone stayed silent, because everyone knew tomorrow it might be their turn to act, or worse, to be chosen. From then on, night wasn't for rest. It was for watching the man beside you. Some tied their hands together while sleeping, so if one drew a knife, both would know. Some slept sitting, backs to the wall, eyes half open all night. Some held iron spoons in their mouths like an alarm. You kept a sharp stone in your hand for 4 nights straight, because the man beside you started coughing heavily. You didn't know what you'd do, just that if he died suddenly, you had to be the first to take his blanket. And then one day, you saw it happen. A man, Jules, slit a comrade's throat in his sleep. No one could stop him. No one dared shout. Someone whispered. His blanket was thick, and in that chilling silence, Jules wrapped himself in it, lay down, breathed softly. No one touched him. By morning, he marched with the group like nothing happened, and you couldn't hate him, because you understood. After that, the rumor spread fast. 1 warm night equals sign 1 life. Everyone started weighing it. Is it worth it? Could you survive 5 more days if you acted tonight? Could you save your feet if you took those clean socks? And you began bargaining with your conscience. I won't kill, but if someone dies beside me, I can use their coat, right? That if was a sedative for your mind. It let you survive without fully breaking, and so you existed, suspended between killer and moralist, a thin line of snow between the living and the dark. Then one day, you looked at your hands, trembling, cracked, caked in dried blood, and you didn't know whose blood it was. Maybe yours, maybe not. But you kept going, kept sleeping, kept shivering, kept breathing, because winter wasn't over, and if tonight was colder than last, you'd face that choice again. Kill one person to stay warm for a night. No one answered, but everyone thought it, and in this war, sometimes that thought was enough to make you a different person forever. A person you swore you'd never become, one who could kill to live, lie to stay warm, steal to survive, and turn a blind eye when someone fell. But when everything that made you, ideals, honor, camaraderie, was buried deep under cold snow, you turned to the last thing. Desperate humans cling to prayer. Yes, we prayed, not just once, not in a church with white vestments or ringing bells, but in mud, in wind, in torn tents, among bodies not yet fully cold. We muttered God's name like saying it would bring a potato, a log, a spark of warmth, or a reason not to slit the throat of the man beside us. Some prayed in the morning, when the sun, if it appeared, was just a faint red streak in a leaden sky. Some prayed at night, when death stalked every breath. Some called on the Virgin Mary. Each time they coughed blood. Some just repeated, "Let me live, let me live, let me live." You saw a soldier make a small cross from 2 rotten sticks. He planted it in the tent's center, bowed his head, and whispered, "I don't know if you're here, but if you are, don't let me die like this." He died 3 days later. The cross was burned for fuel on the 4th night. You prayed too, many times, whispered in your mouth, like speaking to someone sleeping far away, deeply, sometimes just fragments, no beginning or end. "Don't take my feet, don't let me freeze solid, don't make me eat dirt anymore." You didn't ask for victory, didn't need glory. You just begged for this night to pass, for the man beside you to stop coughing, for the wind to stop clawing the tent walls. But no one answered, no voice from above, no miracles, no signs, no prophetic dreams, just wind, wind and cold, wind and the silent screams of abandoned souls. Each time you prayed, the world answered with silence, a thick, heavy, freezing silence, colder than the snow. Some lost faith. A priest in the group, Père Michel, once prayed daily, read the Bible, gave communion with tree bark. One morning, he tore the Bible for kindling. When asked, he said, "Words don't save anyone." That night, he hanged himself on a broken tent pole. His feet still wore white liturgical socks. The rest of us kept whispering, even knowing no one listened, even knowing every prayer dissolved into the air like a final breath. But praying was the only thing keeping us from going mad. It was a way to say, "I'm still human. I still believe, even if I don't know who I believe in." A young soldier wrote his mother's name on the tent wall in blood. He said it was his way of praying. Each night, he touched the word, closed his eyes. Then one day, snow covered it. He screamed, scraped it off with a knife, cut his hand. In the end, he bit his tongue and died, lying beside the smudged maman, untouched by anyone. Some prayed in silence. No words, no moans, no songs, just sitting, eyes open, staring at the sky, or the darkest spot, waiting for something to appear. A wink from God, a falling star, a clap of thunder, but nothing came. Just snow, always snow. You once prayed for a close friend. When he started shaking uncontrollably, lips purple, eyes rolling white, you held his hand, whispered, "Please God, just let him make it through tonight." He did. But the next morning, he stopped breathing, and you knew, if your prayer was heard, it was delayed or forgotten. Once, you prayed for a quick death. Not because you gave up, but because you were tired. You'd walked far enough, lost enough people, eaten enough filth, shivered enough times. You just wanted it over. But then a rat crawled across your face. You caught it, ate it raw, and lived 2 more days. So you stopped praying. Not because you didn't believe, but because you no longer had the strength to believe. You became a walking corpse, a breathing skeleton, a trembling shadow. But sometimes, very rarely, in a tiny moment, when someone sang a line, or you recalled the smell of your mother's hair, or your hands clasped together in the night, you whispered again, "God, if you're real, don't let us vanish, like we never existed." No one answered, but you kept whispering, kept speaking, because in a retreat with no escape, the only thing keeping the human in you was sending out prayers, even when no one was listening. But if you let a prayer slip out loud, a real sound, however small, however soft, what you got back might not be a miracle, but a fist, a knife, or worse, a death. Because you made too much noise. We once thought freezing was the worst way to die. Then we learned of hunger, then disease, then humans. But nothing was as swift, cruel, and eerily silent as death, for making the wrong sound, a cough when the tent went quiet, a moan while others tried to sleep, teeth grinding from stomach pain, a dreamy call for mother in a fevered sleep. And that was it. One night, in a tent by the forest's edge, someone started coughing, dry, repetitive. At first people grimaced, turned away. By the 10th cough, someone snapped, "Shut up." No one spoke again, but the coughing continued. By the 20th, a man stood, crawled through the dark, and no one knew what he used. A rock, a stick, bare hands, only that the coughing stopped. By morning, the cougher didn't wake. The tent stayed silent. No one asked, no one blamed, no one buried him. You were once the noisy one. One night, your stomach twisted in pain, guts tearing. You bit your teeth, clutched your belly, tried not to groan, but a sound escaped, a faint one, almost like the wind. Yet someone in the dark lunged, hand over your mouth, a cold knife at your throat. Next time, a hoarse voice, like wind through broken teeth. I won't warn you. You nodded. Colder than the knife was his eyes, and you learned to swallow pain, to cough into your sleeve, to cry by breathing slower, to die a little in silence. Another man, an old blacksmith, talked in his sleep, not loud, but enough for a starving, shivering man to stand, stuff a rag in his mouth, tie his hands, and sit beside him all night. By morning, he said nothing more, not because he woke, but because he'd suffocated. After that, a new rule spread: don't be the last sound in the tent, meaning the loudest dies first. The most absurd story was a man who farted, by accident, in his sleep. A soft toot, then the smell. Someone shouted, "Who was that?" Then rustling, a groan. By morning, he was gone. Everyone knew life here was as light as gas. Make a sound, it's gone. Someone joked, if a mosquito were in this camp, it'd be killed for buzzing too loud. No one laughed, because it was true. You started living like a ghost, feet silent, breaths light as a cat's, sleeping on your side to avoid snoring, each cough swallowed like a stone. Once, you nearly choked to death, just to stay quiet. One night, a man was bitten by a rat.
He screamed on reflex.
3 others sprang up. One hit him with a broken plank to the head. Shut up. No one knew if the blow killed him, but by morning, he didn't wake. The rat was still there, gnawing his finger. Then one night, a young soldier sang, softly, a lullaby, so light, like mist. But someone in the tent whispered, he's inviting death, and he did. 2 days later, he vanished. No body, no blood, just the scarf he always wore around his neck, left where he slept. You understood, here life and death were measured in decibels. A mistimed sneeze, a misplaced sob, a yawn, a dream with sound, a trembling verse, all could be a death sentence. You once thought, why don't we go mad? Why not lose it under this forced silence? But then you understood, because everyone knew, one wrong sound, and the cold would hear you, or someone else would kill you before it did. And so, you kept existing, not speaking, not breathing hard, not calling names. You only watched, only listened, and kept everything inside: pain, longing, fear, and your final prayer. Because here, only 2 sounds were allowed: the wind and the silence of those no longer alive. And in that silence, where a single loud breath could be your death knell, the only thing you could call a luxury, besides warmth and food, was friendship, a gentle hand on your shoulder, a knowing glance without words, someone sharing half their last crumb of dirt bread. But then you realized, friendship here only lasted until the tin ran out. At first everyone shared, when rations were still in backpacks, when the beef tin hadn't yet frozen solid, when the man beside you was still called comrade. Splitting a portion was natural. Some even joked, doesn't taste as good alone, right, Louis? Louis grinned, handed you his last sausage bit. That night, you both lay by the fire, warm, calm, almost happy. But then the last tin was opened. A dry clack rang out, a sound everyone remembered, like the hammer on a coffin nail. You split the remaining meat with Louis, as always, but this time he hesitated. A flicker, barely noticeable, but you saw, and you knew. That night, he didn't sleep beside you. The next morning, you woke to find him whispering with another group, and the sardine tin, the one you'd both buried under snow the week before as a reserve stash, was gone. You didn't ask, didn't blame, just smiled, then couldn't. Friendship, if it existed, dissolved not from anger, but from hunger, and you saw it happen everywhere. 2 men who once carried each other across a stream now fought over a moldy crust. A group that sang together now turned their backs, refusing to look, because one hid a tin of peas in his boot. A young soldier was tied up by his best friend at night, just for suspecting he hid food in his coat. You saw close friends sit across from each other, eyes empty, the last tin between them. No one spoke. Then one stood and walked away, not out of nobility, but from fear he'd kill the other if he stayed a minute longer. Some started hiding tins in corpses, empty stomachs, stuffed with cans. Some dug private holes, Some tucked them under their chest, using snow as insulation. Friendship no longer rested on memories, but on what tin you got in your sleeve. You caught an old man who taught you to make smokeless fires, crying. When asked, he said his tent mate took the last patty tin and lied, saying rats got it. But that night's fire smelled of goose fat, and the old man understood. He just sat, staring at the flames, tears freezing on his cheeks. After that, no one trusted anyone. Everyone ate alone, secretly, faces turned away, one hand on the tin, the other on a knife. Some chewed without swallowing, waiting for others to look away to hide the rest under their tongue. Some slept clutching empty tins, as if to say, I've got nothing left to steal. You began to understand. Friendship was a luxury, useful only when there was excess. But here, nothing was in excess, not even humanity. One day, you found Louis, your old friend who once shared everything. He was curled in a corner, hands clutching a rag-wrapped tin. You sat beside him. He didn't look at you, didn't greet, didn't speak, just gripped the tin tighter. You didn't ask. You both just sat, for a long time. The wind outside howled like demons. But in that moment, you thought, maybe, friendship isn't completely dead. Then Louis trembled. He pulled out the tin, handed it to you. Half for you. His voice was like dry bones scraping. You meant to refuse, but your stomach ached. Your eyes blurred. Your heart pounded like a war drum. You nodded, and when you opened the tin, you both laughed. It was empty. He'd eaten it at noon, just a smear of grease left. But he still offered it, because he remembered, because he was once human, and so were you. You both shared that grease like sharing a rotted memory. That night, Louis died. You covered him with a blanket, and buried the empty tin with him, and you swore, never trust friendship here again. But if someone offered you a tin, even empty, you'd still take it, because maybe, just that gesture, was enough to keep you alive, one more night. But what about those with no one to offer them anything? No friends, no group, no tins, no voice asking, you okay? Just a faint breath in the retreating column, a limping figure left behind. Those people either died in silence, or learned the art of cheating death when abandoned. You saw it, past a soldier wounded in the leg. His eyes begged, his mouth tried to call, but the column didn't stop. Each man stepped around him like dodging a rock. You did too. But after 10 steps, you looked back, not to help, but to watch, to learn, and you saw he didn't curse, didn't scream, didn't plead. He quietly dragged himself to the forest's edge, piled snow over his body, then lay still, eyes open, like a corpse. But you knew he was waiting. Waiting for what? For the column to move far, for night to fall, for the cold to bite deeper, so the crows would seek fresher bodies, for a chance, for someone else to fall behind, so he could trade places. And sure enough, a day later, you saw him again, alive. No one knew what he did, but the coat he wore belonged to another, now frozen stiff at the forest's edge. From then, you learned to breathe shallow, to play dead, to hide in shadows, to make yourself invisible. No cough, no cry, no movement. A warm rock, a calculating log. Some were masters at playing dead. His name was Milan, an Italian, buried alive twice by mistake. Both times, he dug himself out and returned, silent as a ghost. No one cheered, no one shouted. One man said, "That devil knows how to laugh in the snow." And from then, everyone called him Il Fantasma, the ghost. You saw the abandoned outlast the survivors. They knew how to eat snow without diarrhea, to chew boot leather without infection, to find fox dens still warm, to hide feet in a dead man's boots to avoid freezing. Once, you were the one left behind, just to slip down an icy slope, ankle twisted, blood flowing. You screamed. No one turned. You understood. You lay there, breathing one pulse at a time, counting heartbeats like counting hours left, waiting for night, for the pain to ease, for the blood smell to fade, not to draw forest beasts, and you began to vanish. You crawled like a worm, piled snow over yourself, tucked hands into your stomach to keep warm. You bit your lip until it bled to avoid screaming. You closed your eyes, imagined you were a bear, a rock, a corpse not yet eaten. 3 days later, you rejoined the column. No one asked where you'd been. No one asked why you were alive. You just slipped back into line, head down, like you'd never existed. From then you understood, survival wasn't following the group, it was learning to disappear. Those who stood out, died. Those who were weak, died. Those who needed help, died. Those who played dead at the right time, stayed silent in the right place, clenched their teeth in the right moment, could endure. You saw a man shot in the shoulder by Russians. He didn't scream, didn't run, fell, and stayed still. The Russians thought him dead, passed by. At night, he pulled the bullet out with a mess knife, sucked his blood to stop the flow, used shed fox fur as a bandage. The next morning, he rejoined the column with one line: "They shoot poorly." You met an old Russian woman in the forest. She pulled you into a tent, gave you mushroom porridge, smelled like damp earth. She spoke broken French. The one who hides lives long, then pointed to a cloth on her door, once a Frenchman's shirt, now dead. She said no more. You bowed in thanks. And from then, you never walked without thinking, if I had to hide now, what would I do? You started preparing, always kept a hidden scrap of food, always knew which way the wind blew least, always scanned for the weakest in the group, not to kill, but to know who'd be left behind before you. Because here, being abandoned, wasn't the end. It was a test. Pass it, you return. Falter, weaken, wait for rescue. You melt into the snow, leaving no trace. And you realize the most terrifying truth. Survival didn't depend on strength, speed, or smarts, but on your willingness to stop being yourself when the moment came. But even when you'd abandoned yourself, become a silent shadow surviving, one thing could still kill you, not because you were weak, but because you needed it so badly you'd trade your life. A spark of fire. Yes, a spark. Small, flickering in the wind like a false promise, could be everything, or your end. At first, fire was your friend. Fire kept your toes from turning to stone, your heart beating through the night. Someone whispered, "As long as there's fire, you're alive." But then you saw 7 men die because of it, not burned, but because the sparks glow in the dark, signaled Russians to their hiding spot. A shell came right after. No survivors. The tent's charred remains smoked for 2 days. From then, fire became a double-edged blade, needed, but feared, had, but hidden. Each time you lit a fire, you gambled, between life and exposure. The cautious learned to burn rotten cloth, piss-soaked straw, damp softwood to keep smoke low. Some dug fire pits under the ground, covered with snow, letting only a thin wisp escape, like the breath of a wounded, dying beast. You once lit a fire with your teeth. No joke, your hands too stiff. So you held a match between your jaws, bit hard, and struck it against a stone. Your lips blistered, but the fire flared, small, and you cried from joy. Then you nearly died for it. One night, when the wind eased, you and 3 others lit a spark between 2 rocks. Moments later, footsteps, not Russian, human, a group of ragged, starving soldiers, faces caked in ice, eyes red like wolves. They rushed in, punching wildly. No reason, no negotiation, just wanting the spark. One of your group was beaten to death with the burning log itself. Then the fire went out. Everything ended in darkness twice as cold as before. From then you understood, every spark was a potential death sentence, not just from enemies, but from comrades. Because anyone would do anything to have it. A friend you were close to once stole burning coals from your hand, used them to boil porridge, while you were warming your fingers to save them. You looked at him. He said nothing. You said nothing. Just curled up and found a way to live without it. People started whispering, lighting a fire is suicide. But the nights were too cold. People still lit them. Some for warmth, some to cook, some just to see light, to remind themselves they weren't dead, and some lit to die. A young soldier, after his friend died of gangrene, built a dry wood pile in strong winds. The fire roared high, bright. He sat there, snow melting in his hair, then leaned into the flames. No one doused it. No one stopped him. He burned like a willing torch, warm. For the last time, you started fearing light, not for fear of being shot, but because every light made others see you. And here, being seen meant being judged, weighed, chosen, to rob, to use, or to replace. You learned to make still fire, warming hands in human breath, lying beside warm corpses, burning empty tobacco pipes, stuffing coals into boots, tucking hot stones in trouser pockets. You turned anything burnable into a tool, a wooden cross fragment, a broken rifle stock, a notebook page full of poetry, all fed the fire. Nothing was sacred when the cold reached your marrow. One man cried burning his lover's letter, but his hands warmed, and that was enough. You saw someone light a fire with hair, not his own, from corpses. He gathered tufts, rolled them, lit them. The fire smelled like hell's demon flames, but everyone sat around silent, just held out trembling hands, as if the fire could burn away their sins. And in that moment you realized, fire was a two-faced angel. It saved you and cursed you, gave you life and pointed you out to death. You prayed for fire, feared it, kept it, ready to douse it, needed it, cursed it, because here, in a Russia so cold time itself froze, a single spark, just one, could cost a finger, a tin, a friend, or a life, and you'd keep lighting it, knowing the cost, because the cold never bargained. But fire, dangerous as it was the only thing that made you believe tomorrow. You might not freeze, but some nights, fire wouldn't catch, winds too strong, wood too wet, or simply nothing left to burn. On those nights, the only thing keeping you alive wasn't warmth, but memory, a fragile, useless, flammable thing, but utterly irreplaceable, an old scrap of paper. And you'd be shocked to know, in this white hell, that scrap became sacred. You first saw it in the hands of a dying soldier. Trembling, he peeled off his last coat, dug from an inner pocket a crumpled paper, small as a hand, edges singed. He unfolded it like a treasure. On it, a crude charcoal sketch, a woman in a wheat field, smile unclear. "My wife," he rasped, drawn from memory to remember what love feels like. He died an hour later, but the sketch was folded, passed through 5 hands. No one dared burn it. You started noticing every survivor, lasting beyond the norm, carried something: a crumpled letter, a tattered prayer page, a chocolate wrapper with faded Joyeux Noël, a child's scribbled drawing saying, "Papa, come back soon." No one threw them away, no one stole them, no one burned them, even when desperate for fire. Because here, where humans became cold predators, an old paper was the only proof you were once human. You had such a paper, a letter from your mother, short: "Don't get cold, I always think of you. You're the best singer in our village. Read 10 times, 20, until you memorized every smudged ink stroke from snow. Once, you nearly used it for kindling, but your hand stopped. Your heart wouldn't allow it. You folded it, tucked it in your sock, the closest to your heart you could keep. An Italian, Carlo, kept a love poem he wrote at 18. Each night, he read it to himself, though no one else cared to listen. Some nights, he read amid howling winds, amid dying moans. He read like he stood in a plaza, hand raised, fearless of death. When he died, no one took the paper. They wrapped him in it, like a final shroud. You saw a man wrestle another over a scrap of paper. The other wanted to burn it for snow porridge. The man hid it behind his back, whispering, "Burn me if you want, not this." And no one touched it again. You found a calendar scrap, June 14th. No one remembered what day it was, but you kept it, folded neat, tucked in your coat. Each time you pulled it out, you imagined, maybe it's my birthday, maybe the day the war ends, maybe the first day I'll sleep in a bed again. That scrap, torn, dirty, useless, but each touch kept you sane. One man had a postcard of the Eiffel Tower, not real, but every night he looked at it, telling himself, "Tomorrow I'll be in Paris. I'll cross that bridge. I'll hear the trams." He died after 15 days, but died clutching the postcard, eyes staring far, as if crossing the bridge for real. You began to believe those old papers were talismans. They didn't stop bullets, didn't warm you, but kept your mind from unraveling, because death in this campaign didn't start in the lungs, but in memory. When you forgot who you were, where you came from, who you loved, what you dreamed, you were already dead. Even if your heart still beat, you saw men fight over food, boots, rags, but no one stole another's paper. Whether a map, a poem, a scrawled drawing, everyone knew that was the last piece left. touch it. You kill the final shred of their soul. One night, in cold so deep your blood froze in your veins, you shivered, dug from your boot, your mother's letter. Wet, smudged, warped, but you read it. Eyes blurry, hands bleeding, mouth mumbling. You're the best singer in our village. And you cried. Not from despair, but because that scrap kept you alive another night. The next morning, you didn't die, you lived. Not from eating, not from warmth, but because a line of words, faint, smeared, crumpled, frail, pulled you back from the brink. And from then, you carried it like a second heart. No one knew, no one needed to. But if someone asked, how'd you survive? You wouldn't talk of tactics, hiding, or scavenging. You'd just pull out that paper. Because sometimes, what kept a soldier from becoming a beast wasn't weapons, ideals, or even fire, but an old scrap, written in a trembling hand, from a world that no longer existed. But then you realized, some things were more fragile than memory, faith. And what betrayed you most wasn't an enemy with a gun, but those with white flags, those who said they wouldn't shoot, those who waved surrender signals, those who shouted truce, then fired into your chest as you peeked from the trench. The betrayal of white flag bearers, the bitterest death in this winter. It began as a faint hope. Rumors spread of Russians letting French prisoners retreat, if unarmed. Someone claimed they saw a whole squad walk free, unbothered. They crossed snowy fields, hands raised, waving white flags, dirty rags, undershirts, scraps of cloth. Some tied to sticks, some scrawled "cease fire" in blood on cardboard. And sometimes the other side went quiet. No bullets, no shouts, no guns, just wind and snow. And a line of figures in thick furs, standing like statues in the forest, watching you with unreadable eyes. So a few in your group tried. 4 men, including Henri, a medic who'd saved dozens with just torn cloth and boiled snow. They packed, ditched their guns, waved, sang softly to chase the cold. You watched them leave the tent, snow to their knees, cracked hands holding trembling white cloth like a small bird's wing. The group held its breath. 1 minute, 2, 10 steps, 20, no gunfire. A Russian soldier raised a hand, stepped toward them. You started to believe miracles were real. Then crack, a single shot, not loud, not lingering, just like a stick snapping. But Henri dropped instantly. Another ran, another fell. The Russian kept coming, cold as ice, his bayonet red. No one returned. And so, talk of safe white flags vanished. But not everyone learned fast enough. Days later, another group tried, bigger this time, with an officer leading. They convinced the last survivors, we can't keep freezing like this. They're human, they'll spare us. Some believed, some doubted. You stayed silent. You watched them walk out like naive doves among crows. None came back. A week later, their bodies were found in a snow pit, naked, eyes open, necks draped with white cloth, like a final mockery. From then, white flags weren't symbols of hope, but of blind despair. Those who carried them, seen as traitors, survivors looked at them with contempt. No one buried them, no one prayed, just silence. You had to step over such a body to cross a forest. His hand still clutched a stick, tied with white cloth. His eyes stared, asking, why? You didn't dare answer. You just kept walking. Some started using white flags as bait, pretending to surrender, then tossing grenades when Russians approached. Result, next time, Russians didn't ask, just shot, even at empty hands, even at crying men, even at a child. No reason needed. You began to understand death in this campaign didn't come from guns. It came from naivety, from believing in rules, symbols, agreements, from thinking someone would keep their word just because they waved a cloth. Someone whispered, only 2 colors of cloth are trustworthy, red for blood, black for ash, white is for fools who die. You kept your old white rag in your pocket, not for surrender, but to wipe nosebleed, to gag yourself when coughing, to sometimes look at it, remembering you once wanted to believe, then survived because you stopped. You didn't wave a white flag, didn't bow, didn't call out. If you died, you'd die in silence, in snow, eyes closed, no begging, no pleading, and above all, no painting false hope, because here, betrayal came from where you thought safest, and the only lesson left was, never trust a smile, when their hand still holds a white flag. But even when you stopped believing in people, in symbols, in ideals, you couldn't stop making mistakes. And in this silent white death, a single slip, a moment of carelessness, an instinctual reflex, was enough to cost you flesh, blood, or worse, your own tongue. It happened one morning colder than usual. No wind, no sound of footsteps, just breaths escaping mouths like faint wisps of smoke, turning to frost less than a hand span away. One man in your group, his name was René, woke up, saw the tent roof caked with icy snow. He stuck his head outside, breathed, and then out of habit, flicked his tongue to lick the tent's edge, to taste the snow, and then he couldn't pull his tongue back. That was it. René's tongue stuck fast to the tent's iron frame, a tiny curved edge at the entrance, something everyone had touched dozens of times while tying ropes, never thinking it could become a steel trap cold as a grave. He gasped, not from pain, but shock. The cold was so swift his nerves didn't register. Only his jaw muscles spasmed, yanking his tongue back and tearing it. René's cry wasn't clear. It was muffled, like an animal with its throat slit. He doubled over, hands clutching his jaw, blood pouring with each blink, dark red, thick, staining the white snow like a colorful curse in a soundless void. You rushed to him, but didn't know what to do. No one had warm water, no one dared light a fire, and no one dared touch that iron edge again. René collapsed, his tongue half torn, the tip left as a pink-red smear, frozen on the iron like raw meat. He tried to scream, but only made "nee," his eyes wide, thrashing like a fish pulled from water. One man tried to cover his mouth. Another shouted, "Don't," his tongue's exposed. "Touch it, and you'll lose a finger." In the end, you tore off your scarf, stuffed it in his mouth, clamped his jaw shut, tied it with a backpack strap. Ren stopped screaming, but also stopped moving. He lay there, twitching faintly, eyes still open. No one spoke. No one looked at each other. No one laughed. The accident, a minor mishap, one that could have been saved, became a death sentence, because here, there was no room for mistakes. You could dodge bullets, escape Russians, kill and survive, but you couldn't lick metal at -30 degrees and expect to keep your tongue. From that day, everyone warned each other. Don't touch metal with bare skin. As if we'd all just discovered the rules of a sick survival game. No one explained beforehand. Gloves became treasures. Lose them, and you'd already sent one hand to death. Another man, Serge, tried unscrewing a stove bolt to start a fire. He used his teeth. Result: 2 front teeth broken. Lips stuck to the screw. Had to cut part of his lip to pull free. After that, he went mute. Not from fear, but pain. You started fearing all metal. Knives, spoons, tin lids, buttons, even rifle barrels. Each touch, you'd hold your breath, wrap it in cloth, or wear double gloves before daring to handle it. Once, a man's belt buckle froze to his clothes when sweat seeped out, had to slash his pants to escape. His stomach skin scraped raw, blood stuck to the buckle. No one wiped it. People started sharing stories: who lost a tongue licking a tin lid, who lost an eyelid pressing their face to a steel drum, who lost lips kissing a copper cross during the retreat. Each tale was a reminder. The cold didn't just kill with wind, it killed with contact, with curiosity, with instincts that, here, were suicide. You still remember watching René lie there, mouth full of blood, tongue tip left on the iron edge, and you told yourself, never lick anything again, not even a wound, not even someone's lips, not even hope. Because sometimes, a single reflex, like licking a tent flap, was enough to turn you into a frozen corpse that couldn't scream, couldn't call for help, couldn't say a final word. One reflex, one tongue, one life. And the cold, as always, said nothing. It just stood there, watching, waiting for the next fool to repeat it. But it wasn't just skin, tongues, and blood that froze. Under that cold, the last thing to freeze, forever, was the world's memory of you. Our names, no one remembered anymore. At first, everyone had a name. Full, clear. Some were called by first and last, some by rank, some by cheerful nicknames. Jules Whiskers, Louis Sneeze, Martin Squinting Eyes. We laughed together, called out in the tents. Hey Francois, still hiding those biscuits? Or Bournois, where's your knife? Names were what set us apart, proof we existed. a fragile thread tying each man to the past, to a village, a mother, a first love, the day we swore oaths in the barracks. But then one day, you forgot to call someone's name because he was dead, or unrecognizable, or because you no longer had the strength to remember. After that, you started calling others by something else. The guy with striped socks, the one coughing all night, the corpse in the leather coat, the man with the flower scar. Simpler, faster, no emotion needed. One day, someone asked, what was his name again? Everyone looked at each other. No one remembered, not even you, though he'd slept beside you, shared his first spoonful of porridge, sang La Mer in a trembling voice, that first winter night. You only remembered he died of diarrhea and left warm boots. From then, we stopped asking names. You saw a man die. You didn't write it down, didn't report it, didn't carve it on a stick. You just noted he smelled bad. Days later, you forgot even that. Some died with no one knowing where they came from. No one recalled their stories. No one knew who they loved, who they wrote to, what they dreamed. They melted into the snow, like salt, like the wind. You once found a list printed in purple ink, a roster of the entire battalion, names, ranks, birth dates, enlistment dates, a document full of identity. You looked at it, felt like you held a map of souls, but then you crumpled it, stuffed it in your boot, because you needed paper to burn. No one blamed you. No one remembered those names either. We started calling each other by needs. I need someone who can start a fire. I need someone who doesn't snore. I need someone who can spot poison mushrooms. Those who could lasted longer. Those who couldn't vanished. You heard someone moan in a dream. My name is Michelle. I'm inhuman. I am. But no one listened. No one answered. The next morning he died, and no one called his name again. An old soldier, on his last day before gangrene took him, screamed with his final breath, "Remember my name. It's Antoine Morel. But the wind swallowed the last sound, and by the next day, his name was erased from all our memories. Some tried carving their names on trees with knives. The cold made their hands shake, the letters jagged, unreadable. Someone laughed. Who's that for? The crows. No one answered. Then a young officer used mud to write the names of the living, on an icy wall. By morning, wind blew, snow covered it. The wall was white again, as if no names were ever written. You once asked yourself, "What's my name?" Then stopped asking. Because a name didn't keep you warm, didn't feed you, didn't help you run faster, sleep sounder, or live longer. A name was a luxury. And at some point, you forgot your own name too. You became the survivor, the one still walking, the shadow that breathes, the guy curled up in the tent corner, the one who never speaks. All true, and none of them you. But you accepted it, because surviving mattered more than being called right. Then one night, you heard someone whisper, "Who'll remember me later?" The question dissolved into the air, like a breath. No one answered, but you knew no one. No statues, no records, no medals. No one wrote it down. No one lived to tell our names. No one remembered. We existed like snow, falling, cold, invisible, erased by the wind in a single night. But that night, something strange happened. Not light, not a miracle, but sound. A primal sound, needing no name, no memory, no one to remember you. Just that you still had a scream. Our final symphony. Not a song, not music, but a scream. It started with a hoarse rasp from the hill's base. Someone screamed, unclear if from pain, hunger, or despair. But the sound cut through the whistling wind, through falling snow, into every rotting tent, every dozing head, every body thought frozen of feeling. You opened your eyes. The man beside you did too. No one asked, just listened. As if every remaining cell stood up, one last time. Then a second man screamed, louder, hoarser, like a lion, with its tongue cut. Then a third, a fourth, and you didn't know why, but you screamed too. Screamed until your throat burned, until blood rose. Screamed as if all the words never spoken. I'm scared. I miss my mother. I don't want to die like this. poured into your throat and erupted like a stream of fire in an icy hell. No one stopped. The screams spread like a plague. No one led it. No language needed. It only needed existence, or its last remnants. Some screamed while walking, some while curled up. Some screamed and beat their hands on the ground, their bodies, the snow. Some tore clothes, clawed faces, bashed heads against tent poles, not to die, but to feel they could still hurt. You looked around, every face distorted, cracked, purpled, but alive. For the first time in days, you saw them, alive, in the scream, not beautiful, not noble, not heroic, just full of blood, spit, and tears, but real. And then the screams began to merge. A sound without rhythm, without climax, without end. A shattered, chaotic, frenzied song, but chillingly true. If someone far off heard it, they'd think it was a choir of trapped souls. But no, it was us. Humans still with flesh, still with pulses, but stripped of identity, pride, and reason, left with only a scream, as the final instinct to survive. An old soldier, silent for 3 weeks, suddenly stood, tilted his head back, screamed so long he fainted, mid-cry. We dragged him back, packed snow on his forehead. His eyes wept, his mouth still moved, screaming in his dreams. Another screamed and laughed, the laugh twisted with groans, like a clock warped in the hands of mad gods. Then he knelt in the snow, drew circles around himself with blood from his palms. No one asked. No one stopped him. You screamed too, at night, in the tent, alone, not for anyone to hear, not to call for help, just to prove, I'm still here. A scream, the only thing you could create. No need for a meat tin, no need for a warm coat, no need for permission. And you screamed again, and again, until your throat swelled, lips tore, spit froze on your mouth. But you kept going, because silence, once your way to survive, had become the symbol of a quiet death. Those screams were how we called each other's names when we forgot them, how we said farewell when too weak to bury, how we prayed when we stopped believing in God, how we laughed when there was no reason for joy. It was the church bell, the homecoming cannon, the funeral horn, the cheer of escape, all fused into one sound, the scream of the dying who refused to yield. One night, the Russians heard it. They didn't attack, just stood at the forest's edge, silent. Some said they were scared, some said they thought us ghosts, some said they couldn't kill what had nothing left to lose. But the truth was, they retreated, and we kept screaming, not from fear anymore, not from pain, but because screaming was the only way to write our names in the snow, with our breath, even if just for one night. The next morning, many lost their voices, many died, but their faces, for the first time, were calm, as if, before vanishing, they'd heard themselves live. And if anyone asks what the final symphony of the Russian campaign was, don't look for music or gunfire. Picture a snow-covered forest, moonless, and in that darkness, hundreds of screams merging into the most terrifying, memorable, and human sound history never recorded. But then, after the scream, what? After the longest night, when your throat's dry, when your feet are just logs dragging by instinct. What? Waits. Homecoming. No, that's just a dream, frailer than breath melting in snow. At first, everyone spoke of returning. When I'm back in Paris, I'll eat 3 loaves at once. I'll go to church every Sunday, never miss a mass. I'll propose to Marianne, no more waiting. Those words rang like magic, like sugar in a child's mouth, quick to dissolve but sweet, even if imagined. We counted days. Each mile retreated was a hope. Just 300 kilometers left, just one more week. Tonight, maybe a cart will come, but no cart came. Roads were cut, bridges collapsed, Russians circled behind, and snow kept falling. We weren't going home, we were heading to hell, just by another path. One man, at night, sat drawing a map in the dirt. Here's Vilna, here's the Neman River. Cross it, and we're home. Simple, but his hand shook. Eyes blurred, his lines twisted like dead veins under skin. He collapsed before finishing the border. You once believed in that dream, pictured opening your house door, your mother sobbing, your sister hugging, the baker woman asking, "So thin, what'd you eat to look like a cicada's husk?" You tell of snow nights, roasted rats, the men left behind. You believed, until you forgot the road to your village. An old soldier asked, "What's your village called?" You stammered, then realized the name you'd repeated in your head wasn't your village. It was a street from a fairy tale. You'd mixed them up and hadn't known. Then you looked around, everyone silent. No one spoke of homecoming anymore. They only said, "My feet are still warm. I didn't cough blood this morning. No one died in our tent last night." Short goals, very short. No one dared think past tomorrow. Sometimes, rumors spread. Some reached Poland. A boat took men from the frozen river, but no one confirmed. And the rumor bringer died the next day. A man named Jacques kept a strand of his wife's hair in a button tube. Each time he opened it, he inhaled it like an opium addict. "When I'm back, I'll place this hair in her hand." One night, someone stole the tube. Jacques bashed his head against a tent pole until he died, not from anger, but because, to him, going home no longer meant anything. You stopped imagining too, not from lost hope, but because imagining hurt. Each time you pictured your home's door, you felt your missing toes. Each memory of your mother's soup twisted your gut. Each thought of a waiting woman's hair made you touch your scalp, where hair fell in patches from cold and hunger. Another man, in delirium, walked the opposite way of the column. When stopped, he only said, "I'm going back for my hat." He had no hat, and he didn't return. We only heard his scream fade, then silence. And you understood, we weren't going home. We were just dying less in the east than the west. That wasn't returning. It was shrinking, dissolving, erasing. We retreated from Russia like homeless ghosts, without flags, without purpose. Those who survived learned not to dream. They tied their thoughts with bootlaces, stuffed emotions in coat pockets, blindfolded memories with rags. They walked, not to return, but to not die right now. A young soldier asked you, "If we actually make it back, will we still be us?" You didn't answer, because you weren't sure. You didn't remember your old voice. The smell of home, music, your gait with 2 whole feet. You only knew if one day you stood at your real door, you might not dare knock, because the dream of homecoming, thought to be salvation, was a burden. It made each step heavier, each glance west more painful, and each death on this journey more bitter. And so, in the end, you abandoned that dream too, not to despair, but to survive. You stopped thinking of France, only of a night without snow, a morning without waking in another's blood, a meal swallowed without vomiting blood. As for getting home, leave that to some other soul. But if somehow you survived, if you dragged your broken body through frozen forests, over icy rivers, past enemy eyes, past comrades' corpses, past dreams melting in exhaustion, if you still breathed when the last army crossed Russia's border, then congratulations, you were no longer your old self. Because the man who entered this war, the young soldier who believed in the homeland, in honor, in Napoleon and history's glory, died long ago. The living husk left was a creature walking by instinct, sleeping without dreams, eating without knowing what, silent while watching death, so much that tears no longer came for anyone. You returned to France, truly, but amid welcoming trumpets, embraces, your old mother's tears, you stood silent. Your eyes didn't wet, your hands stiff as wood. The new boots they gave you, you didn't lace, because your feet had no toes. They asked if you were okay, you just smiled. A tight-lipped, dry smile, because you didn't know what okay meant anymore. You were alive, a strange event, but you weren't you. You told nothing. Not because you didn't want to, but because no one could understand. When you spoke of rat meat, they grimaced. Of burning corpses for warmth, they stepped back. When you stared at a fireplace, normal to them, your family thought you delirious. You heard your mother whisper to a doctor, "He doesn't sleep, he sits all night, he doesn't call anyone's name." You didn't call your own name either, because each time you looked in a mirror, you saw a stranger's face, cheekbones jutting, beard patchy, eyes sunken, skin mottled with white frostbite scars, nothing familiar. And you asked, "Who am I?" A simple question you once answered easily. Now, you couldn't, Because that old you, that name, voice, smile, tastes, fears, was buried somewhere in the snow where no one could return. You started hearing wind when there was none, smelling blood in the kitchen, sleeping but waking with screams still echoing in your ears, freezing when someone coughed softly, startling when someone laughed. Laughter reminded you of that night when a comrade laughed alone, then hanged himself with a backpack strap. You couldn't eat soft bread, used to chewing dirt, couldn't drink milk. Too warm, too rich, too real. You didn't cry when your girlfriend hugged you, but cried when a crumpled paper fell at your feet, because it looked like your mother's letter, the letter you burned one night when the cold wanted to snap your spine. You tried living again, tried being human, worked, listened to music, sat in cafes, watched sunsets, but something in your chest no longer beat to the old rhythm. You sat in crowds, but saw only emptiness. People laughed and talked, but you watched them like a man from another world. Some called you a hero, some wanted to interview you. You refused. You didn't want to be a story, because telling it meant naming those you forgot, admitting what you did to survive, facing the eyes of the man whose boots you took, remembering the cry of mammon fading in the night from someone you buried alive for making noise. You didn't want to remember, but you couldn't forget. You lived like a shadow in a peaceful world, walked cobblestone streets, heard church bells, smelled fresh bread, but somewhere you still clenched your teeth as if snow fell on your shoulders, still hid a knife under your pillow, still checked your boots each morning, counting toes. You didn't say it, but inside you knew the soldier who survived Russia never truly returned. Not just because the journey was long, but because your soul was frozen, broken, and rebuilt with silence. And that new form, others might call a hero, but you knew it was just a remnant. So if someone asks, "Are you still the old you?" you stay silent, look at them, then walk away. Sometimes you think, maybe you died somewhere in the snow, and what's wandering Paris now is just the final echo of a name history forgot. And if there's one thing you learned, it's this: surviving isn't living. Surviving is just a slow way to vanish. The story of Napoleon's soldiers surviving the Russian campaign is not just a brutal epic of endurance. It's a mirror reflecting the quiet crises in modern American life today. In an era where many grapple with mental health crises, PTSD, personal loss, and social isolation, we can learn something from those men who screamed in the snowy night to remind themselves they were alive. As in the section "The Final Symphony" was a scream, those soldiers lost everything: language, identity, trust, and their scream wasn't panic, but a last way to affirm existence. This reflects the reality that many Americans today, especially veterans, victims of domestic violence, or those who've faced mental health crises, are also searching for a way to be heard, to be recognized as still existing. The section "Our Names," no one remembered anymore, especially shows the importance of memory and recognition, that everyone needs a name, a place, a voice in their community. In a divided modern world, the lesson is clear: don't let anyone feel forgotten, whether in family, workplace, or society at large. And if there's anything truly powerful in this story, it's the conclusion: if you survived, you're no longer the old you. Surviving a crisis doesn't mean full recovery. In a country with rising rates of depression, addiction, and suicide, we must understand this to build a community that empathizes, that accepts invisible scars. The lesson isn't be strong, but let others be weak and still live. If this journey of survival in Russia's winter chilled your heart but held your gaze, please subscribe to join us in exploring more brutal yet truthful slices of history. Thank you for being here. See you in the next video, where the past is never calm and survival is always a blood-soaked miracle.